seen here because it's just such an enclosed space similar to Waycrest Manor.
Definitely. The sanguine pools on the floor are especially dangerous here in this dungeon because a lot of mobs here tend to walk away when they're low HP. They're just fleeing, right? And then you can't control which direction they're walking in, and they might just walk through those sanguine pools.
Really different pulls coming up here from the two teams. Learn to Fly going straight for that first boss with the Sanguine on the side, whilst Method NA has already actually done a massive trash pull with the crabs. Now, the crabs are particularly dangerous in the Sanguine feature that we're using right now, just because they do root you in place. They kind of strangle hold you. So if they do that and you're rooted while the Sanguine starts going down, it could actually be quite deadly, which is why you see Nerf kind of keeping his distance, making sure to not get in the way of that.
Yeah, so the rook goes to the closest target, so we saw Nerf, of course, trying to stay away, and we saw JB, the druid, try to be as close as possible, because if the druid gets rooted, he can actually shapeshift out of the root and get rid of it immediately. Now we see Learn to Fly already on this boss fight, and they pop their Bloodlust as well, because it is, of course, tyrannical. Yeah,
Sand Queen, you know, is actually a quite hard-hitting boss, probably the hardest-hitting boss in this dungeon as far as tank damage is concerned. She'll periodically summon these sand traps that each spawn one of those little kind of parasites or buzzards that come into the tank and start to apply a bit of damage, along with every time they die, they buff the boss for an enraged 5% increased damage done. Occasionally, about 40 seconds or so, Upheaval will be cast by the boss.
Yeah, so on Upheaval, the boss burrows, and he will target one member of the group and do a substantial amount of damage to that person. So depending on how many stacks of the Enrage he has, the damage is actually increased. So you need to make sure that you do dispel this Enrage before it goes down. As a druid, you can dispel it, of course, with the Soothe ability. But oh, Edelweiss actually goes down here.
Yeah, unfortunate death there. And once again, Nagura, you mentioned it yesterday, we don't have the Battle Res available for Edelweiss. It's a boss that hits quite hard. The Upheaval hits for a tremendous amount of nature damage, not physical damage, Jack. And it can be, if you move last second very quickly, you can actually avoid the Upheaval from the boss coming up. Sand Queen down to 22%. The problem here is that there's just going to start being some just AoE damage on the group. They're doing a really good movement pattern here where they stick together because they just don't have that much space because they didn't clear any trash yet.
Yeah, this is going to be difficult for them to finish it off, even though the boss is very low, so they might be able to, but because of this Sandstorm ability, which is a huge AoE on the whole group, and now they also lost their Dispel from the Enrage effect, and the Sandstorm damage is also increased from this Enrage. So now they don't have a Dispel, they will get the Sandstorm, and all those ads just hitting them, applying those bleeds to them, as you see them just dropping lower and lower without their healer present.
Yeah, I do like to see coming out of Dilemma there, using the cloak to kind of pre-soak those traps, making sure that there's space. They do manage to get the kill off, but it was getting a bit unstable by the end. Both the Windwalker and Glick, the Prot Warrior, dropping quite low on HP. They do manage to down it and move into the sewers where they pull some of the parasites. Now, both teams having access to rogues should be no problem for them to open some of the shortcuts up, and of course the buff cells later on in the upper floor to make sure that they get as much advantage as they can in the dungeon. Method NA has now on the left side pulled Sanguine along, no trash, it was actually the ads from the boss. Pulled Sanguine. Now, pre-clearing that trash has allowed them to have a tremendous amount of space to move around in.
Yeah, we saw Learn to Fly didn't have that much space. They were all cuddled up in the corner because they didn't pull any trash, so they didn't have room to move around. Now, on NA side, of course, we see they have the 20% trash, they got the Reaping already, and they have just way more space to kite around, just making this boss fight a lot safer, especially on Tyrannical.
That should be easier for them. So Learn to Fly will have to make up this trash percentage elsewhere. I'm kind of assuming this dungeon is very, of course, infamous for the cannons upstairs that we'll see. For those at home, there are some cannons that the players can actually mount into to do a tremendous amount of damage to the mobs. It unfortunately is not as easy as you think with the current affixes, as the cannon damage does not affect explosives. So somebody will still need to handle those while it's very dangerous, as you can hit your own players with the cannon, as I've unfortunately learned many times.
So we saw the Strap coming out here on Learn to Fly's side, and I believe one of the rogues actually ran off to open those cages to get those buffs on the team, which is very important on a tyrannical setting because, of course, the bosses have a lot of HP. They take a long time, so having those buffs like intellect, attack power, and so on will help them. Well, maybe not intellect, but attack power will help them a lot.
Yeah, you can always use a bit of intellect, at least for Edelweiss. All of the neutral mobs are pulled here from Learn to Fly in the corner, likely wanting to get rid early of any potential issue with cleaving them. They, of course, don't award any trash percent, but it is very simple in this dungeon to accidentally clip a couple of neutrals, and then you end up in a situation where they do spawn orbs, they do spawn Sanguine, so they just wanted to clean up the hallway prior to dealing with what is likely to be a pretty big pull here.
Yeah, we see a lot of control coming in from Learn to Fly here. They used all this to see the mobs first, let the tank go through, and gather all those mobs up. We will see once they drop low, they will actually try to run away. And these caster mobs, specifically the Sea Speakers, they do hurt the tank a lot, so the tank needs to be very careful, and you need a lot of interrupts to make sure the tank is fine.
Yeah. Outside of the Salt Blast that hits the tank, though, they're actually even more of a pain in the butt to deal with, just because they do cast an AoE shell, a water shell, on the entirety of any kind of allies they have near them, which is just a huge amount of damage that you need to chew through. Now, Blood Elf Racial is usually very good for that, but chances are majority of these teams are running Alliance, Night Elves, and Dwarves.
Yeah, so both teams are running Alliance as far as I can tell. They're, of course, running Night Elf for that Shadow Melt, and we see the tanks running Iron Dwarf just for that Racial to get rid of the bleed debuffs. And we see the Sanguine Pulses in those very narrow corridors. It's so hard to deal with, especially as I said before, the mobs just run away, and you can't really control where they're going to drop the Sanguine Pulse.
No.
Now, you want to make sure that once they drop low, you need to either stun them or you need to put a Vortex down or something so they stay where they are.
You know, this is really interesting to see, and I like what we see here from Yoda. So the skip that Method and Aegis did here on the left side, there's kind of a mini boss style mob, not CCable, a lot of HP that they were able to just run by with one rogue. Yoda in that case pulling it to the side. The rest of the team runs by quickly. He just manages to get out of the way, re-stealth vanish, and they skip it perfectly there. No problem as they get upstairs. Now, it's interesting to see from these two teams, and I like seeing this a lot. Learn to Fly is already on the floor with the second boss, is getting ready with Jess there to just pull the second boss. Massive pull here. Their first reaping only proc now. Method's already done with that reaping, so definitely very different pathing coming out of both of these teams.
Yeah, and one thing to note, the good part about having two rogues here is that a lot of times there's two mobs that stand somewhere that you want to skip. Now, with Double Sap, they actually have two true CCs, meaning that the whole group can run past without getting in combat. Now, in live servers, sometimes if you only have one rogue, you need to have one true CC and one blind or something, but then someone needs to trigger combat with them and then use their vanish afterwards.
I'm not sure if there was a bit of a boo-boo there, but Jess Hollis, of course, the second boss that's been aggroed here via Learn to Fly already, does have an AoE Fear cast, and if you don't interrupt it, well, everyone gets AoE Feared. Edelweiss getting really low here, 6%, barely hanging on, doesn't manage to dispel the poison as they go down. No res again, just an absolute repeat of what happened on the first boss. Glick running away now, just trying to stay alive as the rest of the rogues run too. There's no way they're killing this boss from 81% without the aid of their healer. So they do manage to get away, at least the rogues managed to get away. Dilemma, not so lucky, procs the cheat death right now. It's an absolute bloodbath on Learn to Fly. Glick is just still trying to stay alive and finish off the rest of the reaping. I believe they managed to reset the boss at this point by the looks of it, by moving out of the room. So they did manage to save what would have been an absolutely disastrous wipe, but now they have to come back in, get Edelweiss up, and restart the entire encounter. Method and A still moving through really cleanly and is on the boss as well at 70%.
This is a disaster for Learn to Fly because this keeps happening to them. Edelweiss keeps dying. They do not have a rest for her. They just can't get her up during the combat. So they did manage to reset, so this, at least they didn't lose that much time. But it keeps happening, and it was a little bit unfortunate for them as well because Edelweiss dropped really low, and then she actually got targeted by the boss ability that puts a poison debuff on her, and she didn't have a dispel because she was dispelling the tank for the reaping debuffs, right? So without the dispel, she couldn't get rid of the poison, and she was already so low, and she died.
We have a death over on Method and A as Yodad, excuse me, goes down. No, it's Yoda Dwarf. Of course, Yoda. Yeah, Dwarf. As he goes down, they get him up right away, so the battle res won't be available again for another about minute by the looks of it on the meter there. But they should be able to finish off Jess here. Now, we are in the second phase of the encounter, which happens at 70%. That's when Jess, of course, runs around the entirety of this floor, opening some cells and adding some extra mobs to the fight, including his brother, Shakib, proccing that cheat death there.
Yeah, you see all those mobs, of course, are spawning explosives, as we see some of them spawning around the corner, that dropping really low. Okay, so now they have one more death. They don't have a battle rest to get him back up. Now the boss is on 40%, so they can probably finish the boss off with only 2 DPS left, but it's just going to take them longer, and they're going to lose some time from here.
So Bobby does jump on players, stunning them and applying a dot for the entirety of that duration until he's interrupted. Unfortunately, there's a Sanguine that drops right under Jess Hollis, heals up for a tremendous amount of health, right back to 100% HP, 99, excuse me. They decide to have the wipe here. as everybody releases and runs back. Absolutely disastrous for Method NA. Learn to Fly trying to capitalize on the opportunity, getting Jess down to 36% now in that second phase, making sure to interrupt the fears on both Bobby and Jess so that they can stabilize and move on.
And this boss is probably one of the most difficult ones with Sanguine and Explosive, because if you don't open all the cages, you will get the mobs during the intermission phase when the boss walks around and opens them. Now, if you kill those mobs and the boss casts an ability or he's not moving currently, then he will just heal all the way up, as we've seen from Method NA here. And of course, they had the death before as well, so they will have to run all the way back and engage as well.
Learn to Fly doing well to line of sight LOS, the flashing daggers there from Jess Hollis that does a tremendous amount of physical damage. Very long cast time, and they just kind of peek around the corner of the wall there, make sure they're safe, and get right back in. Jess Hollis now does go down for Learn to Fly after a bit of struggle, but they did manage to save that full wipe, which is kudos to them, because I saw it going in an absolutely different way for a moment there. Get the sap up for them, and then they'll head up to the harder floor. We're going to see some new mobs here in Nagura, including the officers and the thugs.
Yeah, so the officers, they might actually be skipping this part. If I'm not mistaken, they might be shadow melting this. So I was in the strat on live too, where you just skip this whole hallway, you walk all the way up to the cannons, and you either do a death skip if you're a Horde, or you do a shadow melt if you're Alliance. So we probably see the shadow melt coming in here, and now we're going to see a lot of cannons.
Yeah, I do have some slight concerns. I know it's very popular for people to kind of pop these cannons, but the combination of explosive in this environment, plus the fact that cannons damage your own teammates, plus the fact that it's a very heavy melee group, if you get some bad spawns with explosives in an area where the cannon is trying to pummel a lot of trash, it's going to spell disaster.
Yeah, so one thing they can do with the explosive here is, of course, you can line of sight damage of the explosives. So as we can see, they are standing to the right side. They can walk behind the house if there's too many explosive and line of sight them. Now the problem is the person in the cannon can't line of sight, and the person in the cannon gets damaged by all those abilities. So they need to make sure that they try to kill him as much as possible. And if there's too many, they need to tell him that he needs to get out and line of sight or cloak.
So far doing well, but the more trash that they kill here, the more difficult it will be, just because of the amount of sanguine that's going down and filling up the area. And the cannon does have about a 2 to 3 second delay before you're able to fire its next shot. Dilemma just goes down, unfortunately. I think that was a team kill. Releases immediately, getting ready to run back. They don't want to use one of their battle reses on that, because the cannon is the one carrying damage here. So they'll have to be really careful with some of the control coming up on this reaping pack, and of course on the remainder of the trash with explosives.
Yeah, one more thing to note here is you have to be very careful with aggro when you're in the cannon. We see Dilemma die one more time here. He probably didn't manage to stealth through because of some of the reaping mobs that are spawning right now. But yeah, once you're in the cannon, you have to be very careful with aggro. That's why we see rogues usually taking the cannons, because they can put tricks on the warrior, which directs all the aggro pretty much to the warrior, or some of it. So you do the tricks, and then you go into the cannon, and hopefully the tank actually gets aggro instead of the rogue.
A lot of scariness here on Method NA side. A lot of explosives down the path. Dilemma does go down for Learn to Fly again on the right side of the screen. Method NA seeming to stabilize here. A couple of explosives did go off, chunking the rogue and the two rogues, and the warrior nerf down to about half HP. They're seeming to cleave everything else down right now. Some more explosive spawn on their end. Learn to Fly just now up to 46%. So still a lot of trash that they need to chew through using this cannon, as they keep dipping and backtracking back to where they skipped all the trash in order to pull it and bring it out to this corner cannon.
Yeah, so the strategy here in this dungeon usually is that you only kill approximately 20-ish% trash, and then you go to the cannon room, and then you pull the mobs from the previous room backwards to kill with these cannons, because the cannons just do so much damage. Now, of course, this is much more difficult with explosive and sanguine, and we saw Glick actually going backwards, pulling the trash out, and almost dying on the way. Now, that is a disaster if the tank dies while he pulls, because, of course, you're going to lose a lot of time.
Yeah, fortunately, they do have 2 battle reses just in case. Contrary to Method NA, which unfortunately does not have a battle res left, Nerf does go down. As I say that, Yoda dibs down and dies as well. Light goes down to an absolute disaster here, as they have another full team wipe on Method NA, up to 11 deaths now. They're going to have to run back. Sanguine just healing up the rest of those mobs as explosives go off as well. So they still have a bunch to deal with there. Learn to Fly still slowly and carefully trying to pull as much trash as they can, proccing their 3rd reaping wave.
And they wiped on so low percentage too. They used their bloodlust, used all their cooldowns. Now they have to reset one more time. So I think this boss is causing so many problems for Method and A. They have to try one more time. Now Learn to Fly is already close to the third boss and just having to deal with this last Reaping Wave and the last trash in front of it.
Yeah, so they've certainly played it quite carefully, Learn to Fly, and gotten some pretty favorable orb spawns. Nothing too overwhelming that I've seen so far, which could be pretty disastrous for them. But it seems like they're starting to wrap up their last percent. There is just a bit more trash after the third boss that they're probably tabulating into what needs to be killed and what isn't. The Marine now sitting, unfortunately, in that Sanguine. An explosive does go out. They want to make sure to kill that or line of sight it before it explodes there. No problem for them. And they do well to line of sight that last Marine so that it kind of moves out of that Sanguine. They don't have the luxury right now of a punt from the other side or a DK for a grip.
Yeah, one more thing to note here is, of course, not only the explosive but also the Sanguine. It's really annoying if you want to kill the mobs with these cannons, because the cannon does have a cooldown on his shot, so approximately 2 seconds, on like a global cooldown or something. So you need to make sure that you try to stack them up as much as possible for the cannon to hit. But if one mob dies too early, it will drop the Sanguine pool. It will heal the other mobs up. So it's you have to be very careful by controlling the mobs here with the Sanguine.
Yeah, so they do well to kind of keep taunting that officer away from the cannon and whoever was in the cannon itself so that they don't die. Glick here dealing with the incoming onslaught from the Reaping Wave from all over the place. A couple officers and pulled the rest of the trash as well so that they can complete the fourth Reaping Wave and start to head over to the third boss, which is just down the hall of where they had mounted that cannon.
Yeah, there's one more trick you can do with these cannons. If you shoot all the way to the left wall, there's actually mobs inside the rooms, and if you shoot to the left wall, you might actually pull the mobs and they will come out for you, so the tank doesn't have to walk inside and get the mobs themselves. They can just shoot the left side and get all those mobs just running for them.
Ghost walls are a scary thing. Glick getting down to 46%, getting that chains debuff on them as it's channeled by the officer, I'm not mistaken. It pacifies you for, I think it's a 6-second duration, so pretty long right now. Glick making sure to kite everything down as those Risen Soul debuffs keep getting dispelled off by Edelweiss. Method NA, of course, not to be forgotten, is still cleaning up the rest of the trash that they had some struggles with. Jess Hollis now in the second phase once again at 69% as it rounds out around the jail area. 86% on the board for trash for Learn to Fly as they clean up the last of it, and likely will head off to the third boss just beyond the doorway to the top right.
Important things to note here, they got to the cannon part with approximately 24% trash, and now they're in 88%. So there's so much trash you can do with these cannons, and of course the last bit of trash that they need will also be done with the cannons after this boss fight.
So, Knight Captain Valeri is a rather irritating boss, especially in an all-melee comp. Now, you can kind of outplay. The reason I say this is because she's largely mobile in terms of the fact that she tends to cast a lot and sit there with either Cinder Flame, which is, of course, this frontal cast, towards one of the barrels, causing it to explode as you see these large orange circles here. Want to make sure you move out of those. Now, you can kind of outplay this knowing that she's going to cast Cinder Flame soon, where the barrels are, and the tank can pre-position her far enough away from the barrel so that even when she actually frontals the barrels, the melee can still have access to DPS there. So Learn to Fly didn't do that there. The rogues had to kind of sit out for a sec, not doing too much, and they reposition her in the middle of the room. But Nagura, the barrels, of course, do spawn in random locations, but you can move them.
Yeah, so what the strategy we see here from Learn to Fly is just tanking the boss in the middle, wait for the barrels to spawn, and then they look in which direction the Cinder Flame is getting casted. Now, once they see the Cinder Flame and which direction it goes to, they will pick up the barrels that are in the Cinder Flame, will pick them up and put them behind the boss, because if the boss hits the barrels with the Cinder Flame, they will of course explode in this huge circle.
Okay, so Glick barely gets out of that explosion as an explosive orb spawned right where the barrel was about to kind of do a tremendous amount of damage. Knight Captain down to 50%. Well done by them there to clean it up. Jess Hollis now finally down to 8% for Method NA on the left side there. They're looking to finish off that boss and just rush upstairs to do their own version of the cannon pulls. Now, Learn to Fly certainly had a bit of sloppiness to their cannon segment, so some time that Method NA could make up here, but they do still have quite a tremendous lead right now. So, I mean, Method NA is probably hoping for a full wipe here from Learn to Fly at some point. And if anybody can provide that, it will be the last boss of this dungeon.
Definitely. So the last boss, probably the most difficult boss on Tyrannical in this whole dungeon. We do see that Learn to Fly save their bloodlust, I believe, throughout this whole time, just to have it ready for the last boss, because it can be very deadly if you get bad RNG with the AoE circles around the players.
So JB just needing a quick rest here for Method and A. I think he got caught as he was trying to stealth up the stairs there. Learn to Fly now down to 15% for Knight Captain Valeri, making sure to move her as far away from the barrels as we mentioned earlier so that they can maximize the uptime. Complete diagonal movement opposite corner of where that pile of barrels is. Really well positioned by them. A boss that's really not too dangerous herself in terms of tank damage, but if you mismanage the barrels and the explosion timings, then it can be quite lethal for the group. One of those explosions, I'm pretty sure on Tyrannical on this, gets you probably about 60% HP gone, so very dangerous, but they do down it, no problem. And now Nagar, just a bit of trash coming up here before the last boss.
Yeah, so obviously they pull some of the mobs now. It depends what their strategy is. They might be wanting to do the boss first and then go back and proc the reaping, or if they know they're so far ahead, they could just play it safe, make sure they kill the trash first so they don't have to do a risky skip, because the offices later on do have true side, so it might be a risky skip to do later. But if they proc the reaping now and just deal with it before the boss, then they're on the safe side.
The reaping, of course, can be killed by the cannon as well, but it looks like they are doing the skip, or at least a rogue ran up and then somebody kind of pulled aggro. So the wardens move particularly slowly, as you can see here, because they do have a permanent buff that massively increases their physical damage done, but slows them down so that the tank can kind of go in for a sec, do a bit of damage, and get out before they get gib. Final boss is being pulled here. The wardens were accurately dodged, and you can see what is very typical that everyone knows that plays this game, at least on live servers. Overseer Gorgos gets put into the corner.
Yeah, so we see the tank in the corner here, of course, and one thing to note is these circles that we just saw spawn on 3 random members do a AoE circle around them, and after a couple of seconds they will explode and do a lot of damage to those people, and of course you don't want to be close to anyone else they will get the damage too. And they also leave a debuff behind, a ticking dot, which does the damage over time.
So there's the explosive burst going out here, just as Nagura mentioned. A couple of other things to note here. The reason the team is so precisely positioned here and trying not to move as much as they can, putting mobile targets around the outside of Overseer Gorgos, is because the more you move on this fight, the more of a noxious poison you gain on a kind of meter that you're not able to see on the players. And if you move too much and that meter reaches full, you will actually get stunned for a very long amount of time. And there is some movement required on this fight in order to dodge the ground effect that we just saw, and also the Deadeye debuff that gets cast on a player. And once you eat it, you have a 90 or 120 second debuff that makes you take 500% increased damage from the next one. So somebody else needs to split that damage.
Yeah, we see the melee is just taking the damage for Edelweiss here. Usually what we see on live servers is Demon Hunters can take almost all of them because they use their Blade Dance and they will just dodge it pretty much, or parry the buff. We see them drop really low here. Glyx almost died. They do have 2 battle rush, so as long as Edelweiss does not die, they can recover if they have a death.
Team doing well to dodge the cross ignition here, does a lot of damage. Quite difficult to see as the tank, but fortunately the positioning here for the tank makes the camera a bit better. Edelweiss getting chunked there with the bursting explosion as well. Dilemma dipping quite low. It's just a lot of healing needed on this encounter. I mean, we've all done this a million times for those that do M+ keys at home. It's very stressful for the healer. Can be quite dangerous for the tank as well with the camera angle. The Deadeye once again being shared here. Actually, Edelweiss's debuff ran off, so Edelweiss will be restarting her debuff, and the rogues will need to rotate after that, getting chunked quite low as she gets punted away as well.
Yeah, so we see this debuff actually prefers ranged DPS, so Edelweiss is getting every single one of them. Now, since she's the only ranged, the other one will be random. It can also go in the tank, but which makes it a little bit easier to heal, to be honest, because if 2 of the same, like if you get the debuff all the time, of course it's more healing on you. If it's split up on people, it's a little bit easier to heal. So this comp is actually in their favor in this boss here.
Method and A still cleaning up their 3rd round of reaping as they deal with the cannon kind of tricks that we saw earlier from Learn to Fly. So they still have a ways to go. Gorgos now at 7% for Learn to Fly. So it looks like they have this one largely in the bag, but certainly a bit of sloppy play from them as well. A team could have capitalized on that kind of stuff easy. And the cannon segment was a bit slow. A lot of deaths coming out of Dilemma, unfortunately, having to run back several times. But Overseer Gorgos does fall. Learn to Fly still just has a bit of trash left with those 2 wardens that they skip, but they should be getting this one in the bag.
Yes, of course they can kill those wardens now with the cannons, which shouldn't take much time at all, and they can skip the last reaping, of course, since they do have 100% trash and they have killed all the bosses. So it was somewhat clean by them, except this one wipe that they recovered from pretty well, to be honest, at the start when Edelweiss died on the 2nd boss. So they did manage to reset and get back to it and keep a good mindset. So well played by Learn to Fly. Now, of course, Method and A had some more issues.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really good res save. We saw a couple of those yesterday. And I know Sours talked earlier about it too, on just some of the mistakes. So as Sours mentioned, I mean, both of these teams had a lot of struggle yesterday with this dungeon. We are back to a Raging Affix, 100% increase done for damage done, for trash sub 30%, and we do have the Grievous Affix as well, increasing dot when you're sub 90% HP. So a lot of healer and tank issues certainly on this dungeon coming up. Learn to Fly stealthing right away through as they kind of centralize a pull with some of the attendant casters up there. Method and A just kind of billowing right through and pulling everything to the same platform.
Yeah, I think both teams here are doing a very similar pull. It's a very big pull, so both of the teams are using their Bloodlust. There's some very dangerous casters in here. Now, the one thing we saw different yesterday from Method and A was they actually triggered the Reaping on top here before they went down to the first boss. So we'll see if they want to do that again, or if they do the better strat, in my opinion, where you walk to the first boss and then just Shadow Meld him.
Yeah, so we'll have to see exactly what they do once the time comes, but right now the tanks are kind of backing off, playing a bit safely. Nerf says, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to sit here and face tank everything, no problem. I am a warrior. Learn to Fly, unfortunately, opposite mentality, starting to back up as these mobs get their enrage up. Now, we do know that the Templars do need to be interrupted for that protective aura, else they will surround everything with a 50% damage reduction taken shield, unless it's dispelled. But more importantly, Nagura, these attendants and these spiritualists. The attendants do a mass amount of water damage, nature damage, to the tank, and the spiritualists have that heal, the rapid mending.
Yeah, so there's a lot of casts you want to interrupt. The water spout, I believe it's called, which does go in the tank. If it's not interrupted, just a huge amount of nature damage. And of course, they also have a healing ability, which also needs to be interrupted, else, of course, you don't want any of the mobs to heal. And now we see Method and A actually doing the same pull as yesterday. They are pulling the mobs to this corner, and after they're done with this one, they are going to trigger Reaping. Now, one thing to note as well is that Raging is even more difficult on these caster mobs, so you need to make sure that once they are Raging, that you interrupt even more.
Glick taking a beautiful view in of the dungeon as he safely sits up the stairs, getting as far away from those attendants and spiritualists as possible as they are enraged, and some of those bolts without your spell reflect available will deal a tremendous amount of damage should they connect. JB dipping just a bit low here with that Grievous, but nothing too dangerous as they have killed most of the trash, worked their way up to the first boss room, as you've stated, Nagura, and have also procced their first Reaping. Learn to Fly in a similar fashion, proccing their Reaping and moving over to that first boss room, getting ready to skip.
Yeah, so both of those teams are having the same strategy. They proc the Reaping upstairs, they go down to the first boss, trigger the event, because of course it takes a while for it to spawn. And we actually see, oh no, so they messed up a skip. So, because the strategy is to go down, Shadow Melt, and get rid of the Reaping, right? They walk through the living elemental, the big elemental, while doing so, which is very dangerous. So if you don't manage to do the skip, you are going to see a wipe, as we just saw here.
Yeah, they were caught in combat with it, and it does have that ability where it kind of bubbles you, throws you in the air and stuns you. So that's what we saw there for Learn to Fly. So not a very good start for them as the finally full wipe comes in as Undead goes down. Method and A looking in a very solid position here as they get Aquasir down to 68% already, getting ready for that first phase 2 where he splits into 3 lesser elementals, of course, at 50%. Each elemental does need to have one of the party members within melee range of it, else it will pulse a ton of damage onto the group.
And now we see Nerf actually got hit by 2 of those anchors, as we can see them spawn in their room. Those caster mobs will spawn them on usually a ranged target, but JB is the only ranged target available, and if he's standing in melee doing some damage in cup form, those anchors will spawn in melee. And we saw Nerf almost dying, dropping really low because he got hit by 2 of them at the same time. Now we see, of course, Learn to Fly does have to go back and needs to kill all those Reaping mobs again that they skipped earlier with they attempted to skip with their Shadow Meld, so they lost a lot of time from this wipe.
So here we finally have the split of the 3 Aqualings. Now, important to note, these always spawn in the same position at first. However, they will do their frontal surge towards players or random locations. If you get hit by it, it's a huge amount of damage. Should you survive, though, you can actually get hit off of the edge of the platform. So they opt to go with a safer strategy of killing one of them as quickly as possible. And then they had very good luck here where both of them actually charge to the same side, which works well in their favor, the melee's favor, of course, for being able to cleave these 2 targets together. So really looking good here for Method and A.
Yeah, for the best efficiency, it would be better to split up the damage and try to kill those elementals at the same time. Now, this is a very difficult phase, as you mentioned. There's triple Surging Rush, there's triple debuffs, just so much damage overall going through, so they did choose to just focus one of them down just to get the risk away of dying. And as we know, Method and A did have problems in this dungeon yesterday, so maybe it's a good idea for them to just play it safe, especially in this boss here.
They're playing it safe, but they're also playing it as efficiently as possible as they keep pulling bits of trash onto the boss, pulling those 2 2 apprentices on top of the boss just as it was about to die, making sure that they dodge any of the Gale Caller casts in various directions, moving out of those whirling tornadoes on the ground as they do quite a bunch of rapid increasing damage. Now, we're finally coming up to the first mini-boss here. Some teams, especially with Double Rogue, I was just about to say, expect to see a Shroud go up just to make it easy, but should you not have a Shroud, you can actually skip on the far left side too. The double sap goes out on the 2 Enforcers right away to make sure that the tanks can safely run through, apprentices, excuse me, not Enforcers, to make sure that the tank can just run through safely as we see Nerf Clap finally returning from downstairs with what will be a pretty substantial trash pull here.
Yeah, so they actually managed to get 10% trash on the boss fight, so that was very efficient by Method and A here. And now we saw, of course, as you said, the sap coming out. Now we have a really big pool coming in. They do not have Bloodlust or anything like that, and they also have a very little room because they did skip this mini boss and the small mobs around the mini boss before, so they have to kite around the small area and try to make sure they dodge all the abilities that those mobs are doing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of whirlwinds coming out of the Iron Hall apprentices. We have Wash Away coming out of the casting apprentices as well that just deny you ground space. Should you get hit by them, it does point you in a random direction away from the center of the cast, so you want to make sure you don't get hit into the rest of the trash. And this is where it's going to get a bit scary. Everything is now enraged sub 30%, so likely we're going to see some heavy CDs coming out of Nerf Clap, either an Iron Bark from JB or certainly a use of either Last Stand Bolster or a shield wall from Nerf.
Yeah, we see very efficient kiting here. They're going in the direction, of course, if they have to be moving after this trash, which we heard from Sours before, never go backwards, always keep going forward. Now, they did also trigger the reaping, and they will do the same skip as we've seen yesterday, but yesterday they actually had a problem on this skip, and they did have a full team wipe, and this time it worked out for them.
This time they got that intervene right on Shakib as he ran by, managing to get it. Now, a couple of Risen Souls leaked from the previous Reaping Wave, really not a big concern for them. Method and A does the skip essentially perfectly, grabbing the first pack of 3 to the left, along with the 2 apprentices that are patrolling between the left and the right side of the front area of the second boss here.
Yeah, so they're doing a little bit of a smaller pull here. I think they did have, as you said, some of the reaping mobs, so of course, on top of this difficult trash here, you might want to not go you don't want to pull too much. Of course, on top of the Grievous and the Raging and the Fortified, which is very difficult. Now, Learn to Fly did manage to kill the second boss. Now, they are very far behind, but we never know what happens in this dungeon. As I said, if there's anything that goes wrong, if you do have a full wipe, then it's just so much time that you lose because you have to deal with all these reaping waves that you skipped at the start.
So Learn to Fly certainly still holding their own as they do the pretty much exact same pull that Method and A did, but they do it downstairs. No double sap. They're being a bit more aggressive about it and pulling it all down to the central chamber there. The problem is, or the scary thing rather, is that it's an even tighter space, and we just talked about how much area denial there is from these various trash mobs here. We already see some kiting coming out of Glick as he starts to backpedal up of the, well, it's not really a staircase, I suppose, but up the way from where they came, making sure that he doesn't incur too much damage. Second boss already aggroed here by Method and A, Brother Ironhall and Gale Caller Faye.
Yeah, so they actually pulled the rest of the trash on top of this boss, which is very dangerous to do. We saw Nerf actually dropping really low, and we see 3 of the casts actually going through, 4 of them. So Gale Caller Faye constantly casts an ability which, if it gets through, it will do AoE damage on the whole group, and it will also leave a debuff behind, which increases the damage taken, and it will do ticking damage. So it's very important to interrupt this ability, and if you interrupt it successfully, then we see those tornadoes that are spawning here.
Yeah, important to know, I think it's like 30% increased damage, so a couple more go off. Now, the rune that is dropped by Brother Ironhall on the floor here, it's kind of an orange-looking rune, does actually remove any negative debuffs you have, but it also makes you take, including enemies, take 70% less damage, so it can be a bit fickle with the movement pattern of the bosses, kind of relying on that to clean your debuffs rather than just having an interrupt rotation. I can't imagine it's too hard for them to do. They have 2 rogues, a Windwalker, and a Prot Warrior, but there's a lot of damage leaking through into the group right now. 4 stacks going off. It's starting to become really difficult for JB to heal through, as the Grievous is also starting to ramp up here right now, but Gale Caller Faye finally does go down, so the rest of the fight will be a bit of a snooze fest, so to speak. Not too much danger from Brother Ironhall on the group. Oh, they actually changed the color there, and it's blue now. Not too much damage coming from Brother Ironhall, just really on the tank, but you can sidestep his hindering cleave, just making sure to snapshot it in one direction so that you can have maximum DPS uptime as the tank.
Yeah, from some other teams yesterday, we saw once Gale Caller Faye was down, the healer actually went off and pulled some mobs towards Brother Ironhall, because, of course, if he's the only one alive, then he doesn't really do that much except the frontal cleave, as you said, but we're not seeing that coming out from Method and A here.
Yeah, we do see JB go into kitty form right now and do as much damage as he can to the boss before running off. Actually, he's not going to run off, as you said, but now this is where we've seen really dangerous pulls come up. We have a Ritualist here coming up in the middle of that skeleton pile that if you don't interrupt their AoE, and we saw some interest right now on the second boss from them, is going to start ramping up increased shadow damage taken from it, the AoE volley. They do opt to play it a bit safer. I think they only pulled 2 Enforcers. They did not pull the Patrolling Enforcer as well. So these Enforcers do a ton of damage to the tank with Deep Smash. A third one could prove lethal. We actually saw a tank pretty much get one shot yesterday because of it.
Yeah, so they just got their Bloodlust back up. It will be interesting to see what they do with it. We've seen some teams skip past this next trash and just go to the tentacles and pull the tentacles with the patrol pet, which is a pretty significant pull, and just use their Bloodlust there. Now we actually saw one of the casts go through as we see the debuffs on the whole group. They're having some difficulties with those interrupts.
Yeah, interrupts are a bit oddly coordinated right now for Method and A. Nonetheless, it does not cause them any deaths. Learn to Fly still having a lot of struggles right now. Another death going down on the board for Dilemma. They're up to 11 now. Last time we looked over, it was actually 5. So they did incur one more wipe, I believe, trying to skip. I'm not sure. I didn't catch it because I was just watching Method and A's just kind of damage ramping up on the second boss there. But Learn to Fly certainly having a lot of struggles as they just now start to clear the trash in front of the second boss that Method and A just downed. Well skipped here from Method and A to get past the double tentacle transformation room pack with the double sap, and they move forward to these 2 larger tentacles.
Yeah, just very efficient skips coming in from Method and A here. They managed to skip all the reaping so far. The first reaping was skipped when they skipped added trash on top of it too. So this is very efficient. Not only do you skip the reaping, but they also skip the trash on the way. As we've seen just now by Method and A, but they triggered the reaping back on the pack with the Enforcers that they killed before, and they just walked past the trash they wanted to skip, shadow melted, and skipped trash plus reaping at the same time.
Just sloppiness and struggles here for Learn to Fly as Drastic goes down as well once they're cleaning up the rest of those remaining raging mobs. Now, it's not just all about tank incoming damage on these raging mobs. There's a lot of just effects that hit ground and area denial that players could accidentally stand in or get clipped by that would spell disaster for them in the raging environment. Learn to Fly now pulling the rest of the initiates prior to the second boss. Method and A still working on the bridge here, finally getting the double tentacle pack down and pulling up the easier pull of the 2-4 packs here. The cultist pull is a bit easier. It only has those kind of frontals with mental assault that you just move out of the side of, whereas there's only one depth bring here that does those dangerous rip mine casts.
Yeah, I do believe they might be having some information about Learn to Fly being so far behind and maybe just go a little bit slower, because as I said, we've seen other teams before pull these tentacles with the group together and just use their Bloodlust, but they chose to kill the tentacle pack by itself and then kill the patrol by itself and just go a little bit slower, which they can afford at this point because Learn to Fly is just now engaged in the second boss.
So this pack here is a bit scarier than its counterpart. It has 3 depth bringers, so a lot of Void Bolt casts going off on the group, but the Rip Mine that I keep mentioning, as you can see, all of them get interrupted immediately, and does the third one there. It does actually hit the tank for a substantial amount of shadow damage, but also decrease your maximum HP by 10%, so certainly something you don't want going off unless you have something like Spell Reflect available, or you're just heavily CD'd or cooldowned as the tank. So they do really well to interrupt that round there. The Void Bolts don't deal nearly as much damage, so they're able to just kind of eat them to the face, finish off the cultist, and move into the next room just before their 4th reaping.
Yeah, they're about to proc the reaping, and they're probably going to proc it on those tentacle packs here. They might just pull the reaping on top of the boss, as we see JB actually trigger the event here. You need to be walking close to the bridge, close to the boss, so he starts a small RP before you are able to engage him.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. We've seen this done a lot of different ways here. It looks like they might have actually skipped the 4th reaping. They're just going straight to the boss room. They might have just kind of melded it off, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe?
Yeah.
We'll have to see if it actually charges them in a second, but I'm pretty sure by now they would have been here. Pulling the previous reaping pack on top of this boss is a bit scary because this dungeon is notorious for having some of the worst reaping because there's so many casters. So they'd have a bunch of casters sitting in the back here with Grave Bolt. So well done by them to just kind of ignore it fully and just get rid of it with Shadow Meld. And they do start here on Lord Stormsong, the 3rd of 4 bosses.
Yeah, so Lord Stormsong does have a bunch of abilities you have to watch out for. One of them is the... I forgot the ability again. Rip Mine?
Rip Mine.
There we go. So the Rip Mine will pretty much target a random player in your group, will do a substantial amount of damage to them, and it will leave behind a debuff that will slow you. So they need to make sure, especially when you get mind control, which happens throughout the fight, that once you get out of the mind control on 50% HP, that there's no Rip Mind cast coming up, because if you get out of the mind control and then you get immediately hit by the Rip Mind, you might just die. So you need to be careful that you watch out for that one.
Unlike the trash counterpart, the Void Bolt on Lord Stormsong actually hits quite hard, but it is something, once again, that Protection Warriors can use to their advantage with a Spell Reflect, dealing a substantial amount of damage every 25 seconds when the Spell Reflect is available back to the boss. Otherwise, there's a plethora of kicks in this group that can be used to make sure none of that leaks. We see them moving the boss around. As each one of those orbs is summoned, it will fixate one player. Looks like they have 2 sets out right now, so there's 2 balls per player as they move around the room. Certainly don't want to get those to the face.
Yeah, I believe they actually need a little bit more percentage before they actually get into the last room after this boss fight, because in the last room there is only a limited amount of trash, so they probably, I think they need around 82% before they go there, so they're probably going to go back after this boss and go to Tentacles, unless I'm wrong and they have enough.
Or unless they don't care about what you're saying, but you are right. They dive right down into the water, where a lot of jellyfish electrified here are waiting to kind of stun the players as they try to run by, which would be quite disastrous, because you actually can't pre-immune. Like, they just made sure you can't skip this in any way. You get stunned for 8 seconds, so certainly a lot of time loss if you get nicked by these by accident. They start moving over into the final boss's room. JB having a little leisurely swim. Yes, beautiful depiction of what his walrus form looks like, I suppose. Moving into the next room, he stealths in cat form, because these front 2 eel packs are a bit tricky to skip, and you can't actually perfectly move between them if needed, but it's safer to just stealth to not accidentally pull them if it's not your time to go yet.
Yeah, so we've seen a couple of different things coming out of the teams here in this room. Some teams would pull 2 of the eel packs before they engage the boss, but most teams, I think all of the teams actually, do use this buff, or the debuff that the boss applies to the healer. So it will just debuff the healer, it will stack up to 9 stacks, and it will increase the damage the healer does, and it will also decrease your max HP. So in the transition phases where the boss just stands there and pretty much does nothing until you interrupt him, they will kill this trash.
Yeah, so there will be a transition phase coming up momentarily from the boss. I think Whispers from the Void, something like that it's called. Yeah. Just in a moment here, where it will transition players to different realms. So the tank and the healer will go together, having to face kind of a big tank add together. But as Nagura mentioned, JB currently has 5 stacks by the looks of it, 6 stacks increasing up to 9. So he'll have a ton of extra damage, but also only have 10% max HP. Once the healer and the tank are able to kill their phase, they will rejoin the melee. Well, yeah, it is the melee DPS. I was about to say just the DPS, but the melee DPS in their phase, which are easily interrupting some of the denizens that have spawned. Should a denizen get one of their long casts off, it does a bunch of shadow damage to the group and heals themselves fully. Now, of course, if one of those casts go through, it's pretty safe for the other 4 players, but JB only has 10% max HP. It would one-shot him at this point, so they need to make sure that they're on point with these interrupts. But, Nagura, they're certainly not going back to the boss right after this phase.
No, as I said before, the boss just stands there now and pretty much does nothing at all until anyone interrupts the boss cast. So as you see here, JB having this buff from the boss increasing his damage, and you can see him just sitting there in cat form doing damage. As we just look at the damage meter, he's going to ramp up and maybe even be #1 on damage. And the one thing he needs to be careful about is, of course, getting aggro, because if he gets aggro and he gets a melee swing from one of those mobs, he will probably get one-shot, because as you mentioned, he only has 10% of his max HP right now.
Well, he doesn't need to worry about that. Of course, there is a big beefy prot warrior doing the damage they're doing, not something like even Guardian Druid. Almost full wipe coming out from Learn to Fly here. A lot of struggles on their side as they hit the 27 death mark. Edelweiss still stealth safely, waiting to get an opportunity to likely res the players, as they have not released just yet. But I mean, this is almost a flip-flop of the previous dungeon, where Learn to Fly, has this, had the more cleaner run. Method NA had some struggles too.
Oh no, she needs to solo the Reaping.
But she has to solo the Reaping here to be able to get out of combat and res the team. I don't think that's going to happen. That's a lot of extra health, and each one of those Grave Bolts hits for 25% baseline HP, so I don't even know if she can heal through it and DPS at the same time. Method and A looking to be in a very dominant position here as they start to pull these eel packs down, leaving Volzith up. So as you mentioned, they're pulling the eels with that buff that JB has.
Yeah, so of course the eel packs are actually kind of dangerous to deal with because every time they melee attack the tank, it's similar to the reaping mobs. They will apply a bleed debuff that stacks up, and it just is taking damage over time. So it's very difficult to handle if you have a lot of stacks. So you need to make sure, especially as melee and as the healer, they don't get aggro, because if they go down to raging, of course the ticking damage will increase and they might just die.
Yeah, I'll actually one up you on that. If I'm not mistaken, it's shadow damage, even more deadly as a result. So yeah, the problem as well is once the tank starts kiting the eels away, we'll start to cast those debuffs to the closest proximity player. So the rogues and the Windwalker would start suffering, and JB as well. Actually, he will be in there, kitty DPSing too. Nonetheless, they down them perfectly. 99% on the board for Method NA as they use JB's incoming damage to deal a huge amount of Volzith here. 14%, making sure to kill him before he reaches the next 100 energy, else they will have another transition phase, wanting to make sure none of those manifestations, those small shawlings on the side, reach. Each one that hits the boss will do 10% energy to the boss, so you want to make sure you get away from that. They saved one little eel on the side just to make sure they had the 100% ready to go, and they skip the Reaping Wave, and just really well done by them here. Method NA tied up one apiece.
0 deaths.
Method did find their redemption here. 3 on Waycrest Manor.
All right, we're back.
We're back in Waycrest. I love this dungeon.
So, right off the bat, once again, splitting between these two teams, Method NA stealthing straight through to the top left opening that is set for the tournament realm for these players, making sure it's consistent, getting straight to that Witch Triad right away. Learn to fly, pulling the first 7 mobs.
Yeah, we've seen some differences at the start of this dungeon here. A lot of teams went straight to the first boss, as we're seeing Method NA doing here, but we also saw some other strats where they just pull these mobs here at the start, like on Learn to Fly side. But we see Glick actually going down because of the bursting stacks. I think he just ran off, was line of sight for Edelweiss, or too far away, and she didn't manage to heal him up.
Pro warriors don't need no healing. First boss down, sister rather down, Selena down to 50% mark. Milady now getting down to the 50% mark as well. Briar follows suit. We are now in a bursting necrotic affix. Of course, Reaping and Fortified are still there. So bursting every time a trash mob dies, it will add a 4-second dot to the team stacking. So the more you kill, the more it'll kill you. So you do need to kind of time your kills perfectly and not overpull. Necrotic also, much to the not favor of the tank, every melee from mobs that connect with you will add a stacking physical dot to you and also decrease the amount of healing you receive. So overpulling could be quite deadly for a tank, and part of the reason why it's dangerous for these comps specifically is they just don't have a lot of peel in the form of a permanent slow like a Frost Mage would provide.
Yeah, we saw some teams that pulled the boss at the start with Wallace. They actually pulled some trash from the side on top of it, which we don't see Method NA really doing here. But interesting to note, on Learn to Fly side, they actually opted to pull trash instead and use their Bloodlust there. So they did some pretty big pulls here and just used their Bloodlust.
I'm not too surprised to see, because this hall is particularly dangerous for tanks in terms of raw damage output from things like the Captains and the Rune Weavers that spawn. We actually saw some teams struggle with this yesterday as well, looking probably to spawn their first Reaping, maybe take that into the boss as well. We are in a fortified setting, meaning that the trash in the dungeon is more lethal, more health, more damage, and not the bosses. Triad Council for them, probably not too difficult to deal with without that Bloodlust.
Yeah, so Method NA actually ended up pulling the trash from left and right to the boss anyway, so they ended up having that 5% trash here now as they're going into this difficult hallway as Learn to Fly is working on right now.
So pretty big pull here. It doesn't look like a big pull, but 2 captains and 2 guards, very dangerous. Guards having those frontal shadow cleaves, melee making sure to be behind that. And of course the captain having the spirited defense. If that cast goes through, it will provide them with a buff that makes them take 35% decreased damage. So they already have a ton of health to begin with, something you want to make sure that they don't get. They don't really have offensive dispels in this group present, as they're likely all running, well, they're all Alliance for starters, so no Blood Elves here. And certainly no purges or dispels, offensive dispels from a priest available either.
Yeah, we saw the Ring of Peace coming in from Lighty here, which is just so good in those small corridors. You can just pretty much get rid of the mobs completely for the whole duration of the Ring of Peace as they're trying to reach the tank, but they just can't get through the ring. And we see some very good cutting coming in from Nerf here in general, and we see Learn to Fly now manage to pull a boss.
So Learn to Fly does indeed grab the first round of Reaping at that 20% mark, right on top of the Three Sisters. Now, just briefly here, the Three Sisters each have an individual aura, and when they are empowered with the Iris rather, they will have their aura present. Selena, making sure that you can't heal for more than 50% reduction. Malady, of course, will provide a necessity to move, otherwise you will stack an increasing dot. And Sister Briar just has a small reflect on any damage that is done to her.
Yeah, so of course for the mind control that happens at the very start on the first boss that is active, you need to make sure you use all your immunities prior to the mind control going out, because you don't know who's going to get targeted, and if you're the one who gets targeted and you still have an immunity ready, then your mind controlled character might just cast that Cloak of Shadows or that evasion, and then it's going to be very difficult for your team to get you out of that one.
Certainly, so you do have a two-phase fight here for them. You have to get each sister individually down to 50%, after which you will repeat and recycle through them one more time. Selena, followed by Malady, followed by Briar. Once you get them down to 0, that's fine. Now you want to make sure, of course, you beat the 100 energy mark on them, else they will do a Dire Ritual, which just does a ton of damage to the group, but there's no way that should be any threat to any of these teams, and especially in a fortified setting on an 18 with their gear level. Method and A looking to proc their first Reaping here with those first 7 mobs that they initially skipped and stealth past at the beginning of the dungeon. A lot of bursting stacks going out. No problem for JB to heal on the side there as they kind of get all of the Reaping into that main hall. Now, again, Reaping, not the most dangerous thing in the world, and I'm not seeing any extra trash here at all.
I don't think they pulled anything, no.
So a bit, perhaps not the most efficient use of Reaping. It's easily combined with even just 1 or 2 trash packs, no matter how dangerous they are on the side here. Nonetheless, they do down it and start heading back down the hallway.
Yeah, interesting that they're choosing to backtrack here, killing those souls that they skipped at the very start, and then just soloing the Reaping. It's I wonder what their idea is or what their strategy is here, but I believe maybe they just wanted to get their Bloodlust out immediately because they have some interesting Bloodlust strat where they need every little second of the Bloodlust cooldown to be ready, so they get 1 more out or something like that. But yeah, as you said, just killing the Reaping by itself, very inefficient.
Nerf finds himself backed into a corner there with 20 stacks of Necrotic, and the ROP saves him perfectly just last second as the mobs died. Unfortunately, Ring of Peace is only a 5-second duration, and that Necrotic is 8 to 9 seconds. So if those mobs had not been killed before the ROP was done, they could have rushed in and refreshed those stacks along with Bursting. Could have been a nightmare to heal. Yoda, unfortunately, eats a melee to the face right as soon as they pull this trash here. Nerf probably did not have his Thunderclap available or just missed the edge of the mob. Fortunately, no cheat death proc there. Nerf now starting to accrue up to 30 stacks of Necrotic, starting to backpedal and kite away from the mobs as that Ursul's Vortex goes down from JB to help him out.
Yeah, we see both teams now in this courtyard area where there's more room for the tank to kite, so they're making sure they clear the mobs here, and then they will move on so they can pull the mobs back into this area so they actually have room to kite. As you said, with all this control coming in from the Druid and from just, you know, the Rogues helping out too, even though they don't have an AoE stun or a slow because they're Outlaw, but they do have all these single target stuns. They can help the tank out by just, if one mob is faster than someone else, then they can just stun him down, make sure it doesn't get a melee attack on the tank off, so he can actually reset the Necrotic.
So unfortunately, a bit of time lost here for Method and A as well, as they did miss 2 effigy reconstruction casts from those Thorn Shapers, healing those Thorn Guards up to full health. So they kind of still had to kite around in circles. Nerf wasn't able to reset his Necrotic stacks. Now he's kiting around the edge, and you know, there obviously you need to be safe as a tank, but with the amount of raw damage that Prot Warriors can output, you want to be in there as long as possible, just surviving to the very end, so you can try to kill the trash along with the rest of the DPS. Learn to Fly still flying through the dungeon right now, 38% for them. They will proc their Reaping here in just a moment, which I expect, based on what they did with the first Reaping pack, is that they'll probably combine it with Matron Brindle there, that kind of mini boss right before the Soulbound Goliath.
Yeah, so they did proc their Reaping now, Learn to Fly. One more thing to note, of course, is that the Reaping doesn't interact with any of the affixes unless they're skittish, because skittish actually affects the tank's threat and not the mobs themselves. So Reaping mobs aren't affected by Bursting or Necrotic, thankfully. But yeah, one thing to note about Necrotic and Bursting at the same time is that they kind of work against each other, because for Bursting you don't want to kill the mobs too fast after one another, but for Necrotic you kind of want to just kill them all so the tank doesn't get all those stacks. So they're just kind of working against each other.
And it makes the tank harder to heal when the Bursting goes off, unfortunately. So Learn to Fly actually opted to play it a bit safer. cleaning up the reaping first and then pulling Matron Brindle. Now, you will see some fires occasionally spawn in this courtyard area. We see one right now on Method and A screen. Unfortunately, the camera turned, so I am a liar. One more has spawned right in the middle there. So you can actually use those fires to your advantage and put any of the courtyard trash mobs in it to increase damage. We see Nerf do that perfectly here as he backpedals it in, making sure to get that extra fire damage on Matron Brindle that has a ton of HP.
Yeah, so after this minibus, they have access to Goliath. Now, it doesn't mean if they're going to pull it, they might just go further and pull some trash after this room and just pull it backwards, depending if they want their Bloodlust for Goliath or not. Now, we see Method and A proccing their Reaping and going to Goliath. Now, we saw some teams not doing this because, as I said, if you do this the wrong way, the boss might actually reset, which you really don't want, of course.
Method is willing to take that chance as Reaping pours in over the Soulbound Goliath on the left side of the screen. Both teams in the 80s of percent here. Method and A just slightly behind trash percentage on Learn to Fly, but with the amount of density coming up in terms of the pulls, 6% give or take is really not that much until we're starting to hit the end of the dungeon, depending on what they leave up with the horrors prior to Gorak Tool. But we'll have to kind of ride that train when we get there. Soulbound Goliath down to 73%. They're just finishing up the rest of the Reaping, so fortunately for them, no reset, Nagura.
Yeah, so on this boss, it does stack up a debuff that increases his damage then, not only in the tank, but also once you drag him into this fire, it does an AoE on the whole group. Now, if you leave, like if you don't drag him into the fire for a long time and he gets a lot of stacks, then the AoE will actually also be increased. So you need to be careful what you do here. I mean, the tank might be able to survive a lot of stacks from the boss, but if at some point he needs to cut it into the fire and the boss has too many stacks for the healer to heal the AoE away, so you need to be kind of risk-reward kind of thing, right? You might have to drag him a little bit earlier, even if you can survive for longer as a tank.
So Learn to Fly with seemingly the superior single target DPS. I think they're actually a bit behind starting the fight versus Method and A, but have actually pulled ahead with about 7-8% difference here. No Bloodlust used from either side, though Method and A just does gain their Bloodlust right now. I doubt they're going to use it for the last 18% of the boss. Learn to Fly getting theirs up in 40 seconds. Wouldn't be shocked to see... actually, it could go various ways. It could be saving that Bloodlust for something downstairs with the 4th or the 5th boss, or just doing a really big pull in Rawl's room coming up and just annihilating that trash before it gets too dangerous with Necrotic for the tank.
Yeah, so I do believe that Method and A did pull the Reaping on top of the boss, of course, meaning that even if you want to single target the boss and ignore the Reaping as much as you can, of course, it's really tempting as a DPS to just press your AoE abilities if there's just that many nameplates, right? So I believe Method and A was a little bit slower on the boss fight just because they had this Reaping at the start, and of course it did some AoE instead of completely single targeting the boss.
Yes, thank you for giving insight into the DPS brain there, Nagura. A lot of nameplates, must push buttons. Nerve Clap backing up here, making sure that those necrotic stacks don't get too out of hand. Unfortunately, has a refresh right as he is airborne with that heroic leap, getting that Ring of Peace down from Lighty to make sure that he can kite away. Down to 13% though. Really tough to heal through for JB with all those necrotic stacks as the bursting does go off. They do stabilize though. Learn to Fly similarly, pulling a lot of this upcoming dangerous in terms of mob density trash from Rawl's wing into the courtyard.
Yeah, we've seen some strategies where people would actually just go in and kill them upstairs with this very limited space, because of course if the tank goes in, pulls them up and drags them out, it costs you time and every single second counts. So we see Learn to Fly actually just pull them ups in and just kill them where they are, as on the other side on Method and A they go inside, they pull them ups back and just play them in this courtyard just to be safer.
Learn to Fly about to proc their 3rd Reaping, 59%. So they are in the kitchen area right now. It kind of looks like mine with how dirty it is. Making sure that they get all of the Reaping in here. Now, they might actually take this and pull it into the boss as well. We'll see. I'm not sure how much of the trash they've cleared just now, but here comes the Reaping nonetheless. We do have that monstrous lost soul there, representing the former corpse of Matron Brindle. A lot of health that they need to chew through there, unfortunately. Method and A still just chiseling through the trash, pulling it safely outside of that really dangerous hall so that Nerf has room to kite. You can see him leaping across the screen there, making sure he doesn't get too many necrotic stacks as this high density of mobs die and add a lot of bursting stacks.
Okay, they hit so much bursting stacks there. Thankfully, they did not refresh the bursting at the very last second. That would have caused a wipe for sure. But we see JB just barely managing to heal up the group here, and we see both groups actually using the Bloodlust. Method and A for the trash here, while Learn to Fly uses it for the Reaping and the boss.
And we're being, it's actually a bit of trash still left from Rawl's room here. Now, the most dangerous of this trash is actually that Banquet Steward that has half health there. It will cast an AoE bell or dinner bell that if it goes off will silence the entirety of the area around him. So you want to make sure you get that interrupt. The real danger with what they're doing here really is that Rawl is a stationary boss. You cannot move him out of that wall. So if the tank needs to run off to reset Necrotic, which he's accruing by sitting there tanking the trash and the boss, somebody's either going to get melee to the face, or if nobody's within melee range of Rawl, he's going to cast an AoE pulse constantly on the raid that deals a lot of damage. So there is kind of a natural time where the tank can drop Necrotic here when Rawl does his frontals. We can see that happening on Method and A side right now. During this time, Necrotic will fall off, but not if something's hitting, not if some random trash is hitting you during it.
Yeah, so Learn to Fly is 67% trash, while Method and A 62%, and Learn to Fly is also ahead on the boss percentage here. So even though they have one death, those 5 seconds are not going to make up for this. I believe Method and A is approximately half a minute or a minute behind to Learn to Fly here, so they need to catch up a little bit to beat them in this dungeon.
We do see the Banquet Steward still for Method and A side right now, so that should give him about 2% there. So a bit of catch up, but nonetheless, you are absolutely correct. 20% differentiating these two teams for Rawl's percentage. Now, we do have these servants coming in. Not much, we haven't actually really mentioned them in the previous series yesterday because, frankly, they're just not that important. Technically, what you're supposed to do is keep them away from the boss, as any that reach him will be consumed by the boss, increasing his damage for the fight permanently by 5% per servant eaten. But his base damage is already so low, and by the time that he dies, he never does a threatening amount of damage. So unless it boosts damage in any way for the team, usually they just don't care.
Yeah, and even if the boss is buffed, this boss doesn't do any AoE damage, it's not avoidable. So as long as you make sure you avoid the tenderize, you avoid the explosions underground, then you're going to be fine, even if the boss has a lot of buffs. Now we see Learn to Fly are down with the boss, Method and A just downing it as well. Learn to Fly is already down to the basement and is doing a pretty big pull there.
Yeah, so right in here, we still have the second Matron Alma. Similar in health and danger to the one upstairs in Soulbound Goliath's room. Of course, she has her own set of spells. A bit of an advantage towards a Prot Warrior here. They can actually reflect one of her casts called Decaying Touch, and they do pull her, which I think only saw Method EU do yesterday. You can reflect her Decaying Touch. Here it comes right now, expecting to see that go right back on her. It will take her, make her take 15% increased damage for the duration of the cast. Unfortunately, you can only reflect every other. Therefore, the Prot Warrior will actually have to take the debuff at some point, as it is not interruptible. Method and A certainly have killed Rawl, pulling the rest of the hallway outside of Rawl's room right now to make up some of that trash percentage that they were missing.
Yeah, so what we saw Method EU doing when they pulled this mini boss was actually going downstairs and pulling the trash before the third boss back up and killing with this mini boss. Now we see Learn to Fly, it's just soloing this mob pretty much though, without pulling anything on top, and now they will do pretty much pull the rest of this basement and then go down.
Yeah, Alma is particularly dangerous, and they are at 73% now. To complete percent purely only downstairs, I think they need 82, but we have seen a lot of teams kind of kill Gorok Tool, the last boss, and then port somewhere back upstairs in the dungeon to finish their percent and skip that last Reaping Wave. Looks like that's what Learn to Fly is about to do. Because certainly the two mobs that they just pulled, the Sister and the Captain, is not enough to get them anywhere near the 80s.
I don't believe so. Now, they also, both of those teams are pretty close to proccing their last Reaping. Going to be interesting to see what they do with this Reaping Wave, because both of those teams had very different ideas what they should be doing with their Reaping. We saw Method and A actually soloing one of the Reaping Waves, while Learn to Fly always had something to pull on top of it. And now they're both head on head, like they're in the same room, they're in the same area, and they're really close in chat. Method and A actually caught up now.
Yeah, they've caught up in trash, so kind of combined a lot of the trash percentage together after Rawl. Well done by them. And they do still have, and it might honestly come down to it, we've seen it many times, might come down to the 5-second difference in the death that Learn to Fly unfortunately had earlier in the dungeon. They finally managed to clean up the rest of the trash here as Glick resets those dangerous necrotic stacks, and they're getting ready soon to pull the newlywed couple.
Yeah, so this boss is quite dangerous in general, but it is 45, right? So it shouldn't be a problem for those groups. And I just thought that Learn to Fly didn't pull this whole room together, which I thought what they did earlier, but they just pulled it now, and I believe they're actually getting the Reaping Wave. So they saved the Reaping Wave to pull it with this last trash pack, which I would have liked to see them pulling all together, proccing the Reaping Wave, and pulling it with the boss, because I feel like that would have saved them more time.
Which I think is what Method and A is about to do here. They backtracked up the stairwell, grabbed the sister and the captain that Learn to Fly had previously grabbed and brought downstairs. Method and A at 79% will definitely proc the Reaping here, making sure to kill both mobs at the exact same time so that JB can drink if needed, although frankly I think he'll be fine at 2/3 mana for the rest of this boss. Nerfclap in a bit of trouble here though, dipping below 20% HP, seeing that absorb come up on him as he tries to spam Ignore Pain to make sure that there's no death right before the boss. They're actually, oh, they didn't kill the room yet either. You lied to me. I thought you said they went downstairs. So they're doing the exact same thing here, pulling the Reaping on top of the trash. Now, whether or not they pull the boss with it, that is, I think, way too dangerous for the tank.
Yeah, definitely not, especially because they also have mobs that cast those candles on the floor, which leave a black mark behind. If mobs or anyone stands in it, it will actually reduce the damage taken off the mobs by a lot. So you don't want that to happen, and some of those mobs are very hard to displace and to move because they have those casts. So you definitely need to be careful. As we see, Learn to Fly actually engaging the boss here.
Lord and Lady Waycrest is a two-phase fight. Lord Waycrest will actually jump over first. You have to deplete his health down to 20%, I believe 3 times. Every time he reaches 20% HP, Lady Waycrest, which is standing safely across that kind of tear in the ground, will sacrifice 30% of her health in order to heal him back to full. Once you get her down to 10% via 3 rotations, she will join the fight as well, starting phase 2.
Yeah, so in phase 1, when Lady Waycrest just stands there, she kind of shoots at players and does a significant amount of damage to them, especially because it is random, so the same person can get shot twice in a row. And on top of that, we see this debuff here, the Disease on Edelweiss, which is a green circle around. It does do ticking damage, and once it runs out, it will leave this pool on the ground. If you hit anyone else with this debuff, then they will get the debuff as well, so you need to make sure you walk out.
Now, once again, advantage, I feel like I say this a lot, but advantage to Protware here on this fight, as they are able to spell reflect the dangerous frontal that comes from Lord Waycrest, who does get increasing damage stacks throughout the fight, so a lot of damage support just almost passively from the Protware, making sure to pop that every 25 seconds as available. They do efficiently cleave both of them down. Typically on live servers, you'll see somebody, groups trying to kill Lord Waycrest as quickly as possible, as the tank will be getting crushed by then, but they decide to effectively cleave them down and pull these 7. Did they pull all 7? No, it looks like they only pulled 5 of the 7. These horrors are very dangerous. Now, there's a bit of a trick here that we didn't see with other groups yesterday. The idea is that they're going to group these horrors here at the base of the stairs. Edelweiss has run up the stairs to a spot that essentially immunes the Gloom horrors from jumping on the furthest target. Usually they do that and splash for a ton of damage. That's why you see teams usually do CC chains with Ursul's Vortex, Ring of Peace, whatever it may be. Edelweiss is in a completely safe immune spot right now. Only the thing they need to worry about is the tank damage.
Yeah, the tank dropping quite low on top of all the bursting they will get afterwards. It seems still like a dangerous pull, even though the jumping ability, which is scary, is completely removed. But as you see, it drops so low, and we had the bursting on top of that. Let's see if Edelweiss can actually manage to keep the group up here.
Well, this is going to be dangerous.
Oh,
It does go down, but fortunately, it's right at the very end. The trash is dead. Now that they've killed the 4th boss, they have checkpointed that location should anybody die. So Glick doesn't need to be res, just reses up right away. They use Math Stealth to move past the remaining 2 horrors. They actually aggro the horrors. Not sure if intended. We'll see exactly what they do with them as they run into Goraktol's room, the last one. Now, we can see Method and A taking a more traditional approach to the horrors, where they do actually group up down in the tear, kite a bit, and then use Ring of Peace and the Ursul's Vortex from JB right there. We can see beautifully done to make sure that the mobs don't get too many stacks or too much damage on someone.
This is actually so close between those two teams right now, as Learn to Fly just engaged the last boss with the trash on top, which is kind of scary to do. And we see Method and A does have 98% trash, so they will get the last percentage at the very end of the boss fight. They can go back and pull 2 of those mobs just on top of the boss, while Learn to Fly is missing a little bit more percentage here at this point.
I actually think they only even kept 1 mob, so they're probably going to pull it with Goraktul when he's at about like 20%, you know, just so the Reaping doesn't really count as Goraktul dies. Learn to Fly, I think, is definitely at the disadvantage here. Not only do they have 2 deaths on the board, I know it looks kind of like you would disagree with me, how dare you, but Goraktul is at 54% right now, so they're certainly ahead in that regard, but they're still missing 7% worth of trash. They've killed the horrors that are between the 4th and 5th boss, so they need to pour it upstairs. Their Bloodlust still has 25 seconds on it. Methods use their Bloodlust, so Methods certainly in favor to win here, but anything can happen at this point.
Yeah, so Learn to Fly is probably going to play this strategy with the Bloodlust, where they go back after the boss, as we've seen Method EU doing. Now, of course, this backtracking does take a lot of time, as you said, so even though it looks looks like they're really far ahead. The 7% trash is not going to come easy for them. They have to go back up the stairs after the boss is dead. They have to speak to someone, get teleported all the way back, then pull them up and bloodlust. As we see, they're saving the bloodlust for this pull, meaning that Method and A only needs this 1 or 2 mobs that they're missing that they can pull on top of the boss, and when the boss is dead, they will kill those 2 mobs and they will be done.
And here we go. Gorgos finally falls for Learn to Fly as they fly up the stairs, porting to the top of the dungeon. They've already cleared those first 7 spirits, so they'll have to go into the kind of Huntsman Lodge room lobby area and pop their bloodlust and desperately try to cleave down 7% as Gorgos is about to fall for Method NA. They do have the horror in there, so as soon as that horror falls, it is over, and it looks like Method NA is going to take the series 2-1 and stay alive in this tournament. Whew. Well fought by Learn to Fly, but it just was not enough in the end.
Method NA taking a very convincing
Enforcer that only goes away once you kill the very first boss, right? So you can't actually pull the Enforcer on top of it unless you pull the trash bag too, because if you pull it, it will walk through the trash bag and get the whole trash, this big trash bag back up as well. But we actually see a very different strat coming out of Team Puolukka here. So they're doing exactly what you said. They're pulling this Enforcer from the bridge. They also pull the trash bag that was standing just in front there, and they're killing that instead of the other strats that we have seen from the groups before.
Well, it doesn't really matter which one of the 2 Enforcer packs you kill. You got to kill one, either the one that Copenhagen pulled in front of the boss's kind of ring area, or the one down the stairs from Team Puolukka. The only difference really is the Team Puolukka one has 1 extra Hound in it, which is just a bit more tank damage, but shouldn't be too much of concern from them. A lot of difficulty here for Copenhagen early on, though, as Harudra goes down, Gravity falls as well. Both rogues and a full team wipe coming out of Copenhagen, along with the extra death as they try to kind of rush back with it. So 6 deaths on the board for them. Bloodlust just now falling off for Team Puolukka as they manage to clean up the rest of the trash that they pulled. And I mean, the elemental damage, the elemental shaman damage, kind of proving why it belongs there.
Definitely. They also popped their bloodlust, of course, for this big pull that they did. Now Copenhagen, they chose to save their bloodlust and immediately just it went wrong from the get-go. Now what they're actually trying to do is killing the start instead of doing this pull that they tried to do before, which probably makes their route different now. I'm not sure why they're doing this. Maybe they don't have the Shadow Battle anymore, or they don't have their Shadow Melt, so they have to kill it. But Team Puolukka already, Proctor Reaping, already fighting the very first boss here.
Yeah, I would assume it's just that they don't feel comfortable getting back to the trash that they were at before. Team Puolukka pulling that first Reaping on top of Sky Captain Craig. Of course, want to remind those at home that we have now moved over to teaming and volcanic. Teaming means that there are more trash mobs present in the dungeon. You also require to kill more trash in order to complete your 100%. Also, Quaking, just really more of a nuisance. Every 20 seconds or so, there will be a ring around players that pulses for 20% of their max HP. You can't hit other players with it, and if you're caught casting during the hit, you will get interrupted and silenced.
Yeah, so Quaking can be dangerous in some of the boss fights, especially if you have to stack up somewhere and then you get the Quaking in the wrong moment where you don't want it. But we see Team Puolukka here fighting the very first boss, is Crag. Crag, he is doing some abilities that you need to watch out for, especially this big shot. So he targets random player, and he will do those massive single target shot towards this player. Now, if you stand in the way, you will get hit as well. So you need to make sure that you position properly here, and it's especially difficult the more melees you have. We've seen a lot of like triple melee setups, so there's only that much space around the boss, and the shot that goes towards a player has a decently wide cone. So you need to make sure that you have this pretty much square angle around the boss, so if the shot goes on one player, the other one is not getting hit by it as well.
We see DJ Frush safely sitting outside the ring, is not to have to deal with any of the parrot poop that comes down, raining upon the ring. Also, you don't have to move for the parrot when it comes down and charges across the arena, so he can just mostly sit there safely and just tunnel the boss, no problem. Down to 35% now for Team Puolukka, looking really solid here as they slowly kite around the circle. Now, Got is sitting, of course, opposite end of the circle from where the melee are to not only bait some of the parrot poop that comes down, but bait those shots that you mentioned in that direction.
Yeah, so there was actually a strategy that worked on this boss before, where you could actually just drag the boss out of the arena with all the melee and all the DPS, except the only person who would stay inside the arena was the healer. Now, the healer would bait all the birds, all the pools underground, so anyone else didn't really have to deal with any of the boss's ability. But they did change this boss now, so as soon as you drag him out, he will actually reset. So you need to keep him inside of the arena. The only people who can stay outside and still avoid the pools underground and avoid the birds are the ranged DPS as we see Frusha, of course.
Copenhagen finally getting themselves back and recomposed as they're at 26% trash, so a bit of extra trash that they likely did not intend to clear, but they did have that wipe, so have to choose through an opening essentially to get back to it. Sky Captain Craig at 65% for them, and they indeed did use their Bloodlust on the pull there. Puolukka now downing the first boss and getting ready to move over to the bridge where they've already previously cleared that Enforcer that we were talking about earlier, so they can just safely mount up and go past the bridge. Obviously, if you had a Warlock, you can skip over kind of the corner of the bridge and skip that mob entirely, but not part of this meta.
Yeah, so if the Enforcer is there, there's other scripts you can do, like the Rogue pulling it away and everyone else walking past and then a Rogue coming back. But all of this, of course, costs you some time, right? And as we mentioned before, Team Puolukka just does not have 5 Night Elves because they have this Shaman who cannot be a Night Elf. So they don't have this option of just doing a skip and shadow melting at the very end. So they have to be mindful of how their routes turns out to be.
Yeah, of course, not many Night Elves left after the burning of Teldrassil, so Shaman just can't go in that direction. Team Puolukka now doing a fairly modest pull here in front of the second boss area, looking to likely use the Reaping to their advantage soon with either a larger pull. They actually multiply the pull in the direction of Trothak, the third boss. More kind of come in on top of them. We do have a Trapper in there as well. Particularly dangerous mob as he puts down these blue traps that you see on the screen right now. Falling victim to those will root you in place and put a fairly heavy dot on you, and you certainly don't want to be rooted as a full melee squad, almost a full melee squad, excuse me, almost forgot about Shaman, but with Quaking coming out is what I wanted to mention.
Yeah, so Gotcha just went back and pulled that Trapper, that Rat, down while Click actually went and pulled something else on top, and now they just keep chaining, which is something you usually don't really want to do with rogues because they want to get out of combat, they want to resell to get their opener in, but we just see them here just chain pulling on top, and we see Frusha actually struggling a little bit with the damage here because he probably does not have his cooldowns ready or saving them for a later pull. But we see the rogues, of course, they don't need cooldowns, they just do damage all the time.
That is what rogues are best at doing. DJ Frush having, just getting some of that ramp up done. Not really the most effective pulls for this elemental shaman. They want to just have a mass pull, group everything up instead of just constantly dribbling in, 3, 4, 5 targets at a time. Copenhagen has now downed the first boss and is making their way over. Unfortunately, their bridge is blocked off by this Enforcer. Somebody has run too close to it and pulled it. Not sure if on purpose or not. We'll see if they use a meld or just kind of combine the Enforcer with some of the trash that Team Puolukka is already working on. Now, one of the things I really like about this dungeon, Dagor, is it's so open. You can do the Council next, you can do Trothak next, you can even do Harlan, the last boss, technically last boss of the dungeon, as your second boss. So many trash packs to opt through if you want.
Yeah, so the second boss here, the pirate event, is important though, because if you do not kill this boss, then your respawn point is going to be the entrance of the dungeon, or on the first boss rather, instead of spawning here right where the pirate event is. So some teams choose to kill this boss early because we talked about this a lot, but we don't have a lot of battle rests in those groups. So for Team Puolukka, it's only the Rest Druid, and also for Copenhagen, it's actually the Rest Druid and the DK. So with less battle rests available to you, if one person dies, especially if the healer dies, if you have your respawn, just be a lot closer. It's just so much safer for the group instead of walking all the way from the first boss to this place, especially when there's mobs in between and reaping mobs that you need to skip somehow.
Fairly juicy pull coming here from Team Puolukka as they combine the 40% or second reaping wave along with, I believe, a double trash pack, if I'm not mistaken there. So a lot of mobs to be cleaving down. Huge amounts of damage coming out of DJ Frusha, showing why he belongs here on this team right now. Copenhagen just now finishing off a trash pull of their own where the Prot Warrior certainly flexed that T-clap, thunderclap muscle, making sure to top the damage meters right beforehand. Now they're looking like they did a bit of a smaller pull of Copenhagen there, probably to proc their reaping as well in a moment at 40% and get ready to either pull it with a boss or with some trash, hopefully.
Yeah, we see Gravity actually not being in range here of the tank, so he's probably going around pulling some mobs on top of the tank. Now, as I said earlier, rogues do have tricks, right, which misdirects their aggro generated a little bit to the tank, meaning they can just pop their tricks on the tank, which is an infinite range once it's applied, and then they can just walk around, pull mobs, and they will just keep running to the tank, which is very important for those kind of pulls that are coming from all directions, because if you pull from 3 different directions and you don't have aggro on everything, then it's on their way, they're just gonna kill the healer most likely.
Nice shot there of Gautja, making sure to grab the pig and bring home the bacon for the team as they start the event for Ludwig van Tortolen to spawn here in the ring. Now, the nice thing about the Ring of Booty here is that you get to pull a lot of really efficient and effective and quite frankly not too difficult trash around the outside of the arena, while you have those 25 to 30 second RP or role-playing spawn times for Ludwig, followed by, of course, Trothak, the third boss.
Yeah, so Ludwig is actually considered a trash mob, so once Reaping spawns, Ludwig will be part of this Reaping wave with a lot of HP. So what people tend to do with this Reaping wave, especially with Ludwig's soul inside as well, you either skip it with Shadow Melt somehow, or you pull it on top of something else that is that takes a long time to kill, like the boss, for example, because it just has so much HP.
We see a lot of good shell dodging coming out here from Frusha, as the 60% third Reaping Wave comes in on top of Ludwig for them. So they'll be happily cleaving that down as they move out of these extremely fast-moving shells on the ground. Copenhagen, 57% on the board for trash. Also rearing up to, likely looks like they are indeed as well stealthing to the Ring of Booty, getting ready to spawn their third Reaping Wave. So now we're starting to see similar pulls and strategies coming out of both teams. Unfortunately, Copenhagen is held up because of their earlier wipe.
Yeah, so Team Puolukka does have the Bloodlust ready soon, so interesting to see what they're going to do with this Bloodlust. It is tyrannical, of course, so the boss fights do take a long time, and especially this next boss, the Shark Puncher, is going to take a long time, and it's also a pretty dangerous boss, because he does throw sharks at random players, usually ranged players, and we actually have 2 ranged in this group, which is not very common for the MDI right now, but we do have the Elemental Shaman and the Resto Druid, so the Resto Druid needs to make sure he takes those sharks away as they fixate the closest player to them and kites them around the room so DJ Fruga can stand still and do damage.
Yeah, Trothak always been a bit of a fishy character there as he enters the arena slowly for Team Puolukka. Certainly in their favor, though, as you mentioned, they do have that range that can help kite the sharks, but not only that, but they can freely DPS during that whirlwind phase. So a lot of good damage here. Bloodlust is available for Team Puolukka. Now, we've seen this used in various ways for the teams. Some people save it for the Council of Captains. We are in a tyrannical setting. We know how easily a player can be gibbed by Eudora's shots. Some save it for Harlan, and we've seen the final trash being pulled on top of Harlan at the end. And of course, Trothak, you know, perhaps not the most efficient use of it on occasion of using a lot of melee, but nonetheless, they do pull Trothak here along with their 80% Reaping Wave, start to cleave everything down. No use of Bloodlust just yet for them.
Yeah, so if they don't use Bloodlust now, they probably don't use it at all, unless they're waiting for some big coolness to come up. But we see the big Reaping Soul, the Lost Soul from Ludwig here with a lot of HP. They obviously want to try to focus the boss as much as they can, but while the boss is casting this whirlwind where the melees can't really stand in unless they have a defensive cooldown ready, they can do damage to the souls instead. So a very efficient pull here. When the melees can't hit the boss, they just hit Ludwig's soul instead.
Stormkeeper being cast by DJ Frusha, and as Zaronic so aptly mentioned yesterday, having the Lost Soul with the high amount of HP here will increase the amount of Lava Burst procs that DJ Frusha will get from his 2 dot applications, just increasing the overall damage and getting some Maelstrom build as well. So really, you'll probably see both of these die at around the same time to maximize their single target on Trothak, which just has an immense amount of HP, health, and of course just melee are very ineffective in terms of consistent DPS on Trothak. Copenhagen, not to be forgotten on the right side there, is just now pulling Trothak themselves. No Bloodlust coming out of them as this still has a 54-second cooldown. Likely we'll be seeing it later either with Harlan or with the Council of Captains.
Yeah, good that you mentioned the damage of the Elemental Shaman. As we can see, he's also standing on the left side of this arena because there's actually dummies just outside the arena. So Frusha can actually put his dots on those dummies during the boss fight and getting those increased procs on the boss. So very efficient here. And just Trothak, as we can see, the healer, of course, Gauntlet just kiting those sharks around. Of course, DJ Frusha doesn't want to deal with them because if he's moving, he's not doing damage. So we see the charge as well coming in. So sometimes Trothak will charge at the shark and pick him up. So you need to make sure that you're not in between the shark and the boss, because if you get hit by the charge, you gain damage and you also get knocked back.
Yeah, certainly want to move out of the way of those. Now, when he does throw a shark at one of the players, it will actually start bouncing, as we can see in the far side of the screen there, towards the closest proximity player at quite a high speed. So the way to stop them is by kiting them through some of these chum pools or blood pools on the ground. It'll slow the sharks down by 50%, making them much easier to handle. Trothak down to 10% for Team Puolukka here as they start to kind of kite around in the corner. Ludwig still has a fair bit of health, so they're probably going to want to kind of crank the damage on that so to not waste too much time once Trothak dies, unless they decide to pull it directly into another trash pack. Team Copenhagen, 50% just now on Trothak as he charges off and grabs another shark.
Yeah, so Copenhagen doesn't choose to pull the Reaping on top of Trothak here. They didn't trigger it yet. That means after this boss, they will have to trigger the Reaping. Either they skip it, because as I said, they will get Ludwig's Soul, which has so much HP compared to all the other Reaping mobs. So either they do an efficient pull later where they pull trash on top of that Reaping, or they just try to completely skip it with the Shadow Melt, which is a little bit difficult in this dungeon because everything is kind of close to each other.
Wouldn't be surprised perhaps they even pull it on top of the Council of Captains. That is a bit scary though, because Ludwig's going to be there constantly displacing them with that Shadow Smash, and it is a bit of a finicky movement fight where you want to take advantage of the bruise. We'll talk a bit more about that once we actually reach that boss, but Team Puolukka has pulled some more trash just up the ramp between the second and third boss, overlooking the valley leading to Harlan, of course. 84% on the board from them. They're likely not going to want to proc their 5th Reaping Wave here. They're either going to do that with Harlan or kill all the bosses first and then get their 100% trash, as we've seen teams so commonly do in order to skip the last Reaping Wave.
Yeah, so I believe they're just going to get the last percentage that they need. They're actually doing the event now to make sure that the boss is actually attackable, the pirate event, and now we see them stealthing towards the boss, and now they... As I said, both of them saved their Bloodlust exactly for this fight, because it is a tyrannical setting. And this boss, especially Eudora, is very, very dangerous with her shot. As we can see, Barrow just dropping really, really low from this very first shot.
Yes, a lot of damage going out. DJ Frusha getting absolutely nuked. So really some important points to this fight. Eudora is definitely the most dangerous of the 3 captains. One is, of course, not available, as every week there will be a rotation of which captains, 2 captain pairs you have to fight here. Eudora will jump to one of the corners of this area, one of the 4 corners, and in a clockwise fashion do her grape shot, covering the arena and blanketing it in bullets. You want to make sure you avoid that. It's a ton of damage. She also do some spot shots on random players, which is what Nagura mentioned, why we saw some of the players chunk so hard. So those in combination with any kind of splash damage, especially if they were to bring some of the Reaping on there and accidentally get hit, easily one-shots a player. But I think the key to this fight, Nagura, is certainly the bruise that we're seeing get tossed down right now.
Yeah, so the bruise that you can see on the floor, which are those brown circles, as you can see, sometimes they will have a buff if you stand in it, and sometimes they will have a debuff. Now, the players and the bosses are actually getting affected by this. It can be crit, haste, or it will be damage dot that damages you. So if it's a bad debuff, the dot, then the players of course do not want to stand in it, but you want to make sure or at least try to have the bosses stand in it, because they will get the dot and they will be damaged by it. Now if it's a beneficial buff like haste or crit for the players, you have to try to not pull the bosses inside it, because they will also be affected by it. And if Eudora has haste and does her powder shots faster, it's even scarier.
Powder shot going off on the sync there. They're doing a more efficient cleaving strat here, but of course it's more dangerous because we mentioned the longer Eudora is alive, the more powder shots and grape shots go out, and it can spell disaster for some of the players. Nonetheless, Eudora does fall for Team Puolukka. It should be easy sailing here for the remaining captains as they look to finish them off. We do see some of those brews getting tossed down. Copenhagen has also started their encounter, certainly not too far behind. They did not actually use their Bloodlust, so they'll likely be saving it for some kind of bigger trash pull, perhaps even in combination with Harlan.
That is very interesting to see. They did not trigger the 80% Reaping Wave. Oh, and we see one player die here. They do have a Battle Rest available to them, so they can get him back up. Only one Battle Rest left for them, but interesting choice to not use their Bloodlust here.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, though, they're still at 78% trash. They haven't even procced their 4th Reaping Wave, whereas Team Puolukka is at 92%, already crossing the bridge over to the last area of the dungeon, which contains Harlan's Suite, the final boss of the dungeon. Captain Eudora now at 3% for Team Copenhagen on the small screen on the right, getting ready to finish that up and then clean up Captain Ruel. Team Puolukka really doing a more effective job of cleaving the 2 bosses versus Team Copenhagen. Ruel was at about 23% when Eudora died from them, so certainly a bit of time gained there. We see the double sap come up from the 2 rogues, which is true CC, allowing the members to kind of just run right through them.
Yeah, so one thing we saw Team Puolukka do there was they were just waiting, right? They were waiting around, the mobs were already stepped, and they did nothing. And what they actually did was wait for the quaking. Now, we see some teams in the past, in last MDIs, not wait for this quaking before they shrouded, and once you shroud and you're close to each other, if you damage other people with their quaking, you actually get out of the shroud. So it's very important to wait for that quaking to go through and then shroud afterwards to make sure that the skip is working out.
Harlan Sweet being kited around here to the corner, wanting to kind of make sure you avoid that cannon barrage. Sweet, not really too mechanically complex of a boss, especially versus some other end bosses in the dungeons. Really just two things you have to worry about. One is his cannonball barrage that we just saw, and two is he kind of sends out these wind debuffs in one random direction. Now, when he reaches 60%, however, he will actually do these effects to an amplified value.
Yeah, so the one ability we see here in the back is they sometimes spawn these ads that will fixate preferably a ranged player, and they will walk to them. If they actually reach the player, they will explode, knock them back, and do a significant amount of damage, especially on Tyrannical. So what we see Gotcha doing here, the rest of it, just wait in the back until it spawns and just throw a ruse entanglement on the mob so it doesn't move, and you can just ignore this mechanic pretty much.
Copenhagen now grabbing their fourth Reaping Wave. You can see the massive ghost of Ludwig von Tortolen, unfortunately kind of running around with them, still has half health after they've already cleared the entirety of the Reaping pack. So they're going to need to drag him along and either try to kill him off on the bridge so they themselves can also stealth up to Harlan, or, I mean, we still have to see what they're doing with the Bloodlust. And, you know, we're kind of reaching the end of the dungeon here, so it's going to be soon. Curious to see how they combine it with Harlan.
I do believe Copenhagen just had to change up their route on the go because of this vibe at the very start. So they chose to pull some trash that wasn't in their route to start with. So now they have to change things up, and it's not really working out for them. They are reaching the last boss though, but Team Puolukka is so far ahead at this point. They're already 43% on the boss, and they only need 8% trash.
Very sweet and sour finish here for them, potentially. 92% right now, still on the board for trash, so they will have to pile something on top of it. Now, we've seen two options here, Nagura, from some of the other teams. Some people have just been bold enough to pull that double Enforcer pack on top of Harlan.
That's
just
scary.
Yeah, very scary. Just go crazy on it. Conversely, the easier and safer route is to go down to the Ravagers at the bottom, which do cast that painful motivation, which takes 3% health per second, but also increases damage of all affected mobs by 45%. So I assume likely they'll go with them. And similar to how you said in the last series, they're probably kind of seeing what's going on right now, and they know they're a bit ahead.
Yeah, so I believe this Ravager pack with the painful motivation does give 8% approximately, so I do believe that's what they're going to do. And now the boss is actually below 30%, so he does take 100% increased damage, meaning this is not going to take them too long anymore. Then we will see just rush over to that Ravager pack. Now the one thing to note is it only applies the debuff to themselves and two mobs around them at random, and it can stack as well. So the debuff can get applied to the same mob twice, which you don't want to happen. So what we're going to see is that they're going to throw out some CC, and they're going to have the tank pick up 3 mobs while the other 3 mobs just stay there, stay CC'd, so to make sure that the painful motivation actually goes into the right targets.
So we see them move up now, looking like a dominant first game about to be taken here by Team Puolukka. Copenhagen down but not out technically just yet. They're 97% on trash, dealing with some of it right now. Harlan Sweet at 57%. Bloodlust was popped earlier, but right now we're going to have this painful motivation finish up for Team Puolukka, and they will quite dominantly take the first game.
Very strong and clean performance here at a Team Puolukka.
As their counterpart did not at the very beginning of the dungeon. So we are seeing actually what he did predict. They just stealth right past straight to that first boss. Now, the disadvantage of this, of course, is they have very little space to work with.
Yeah, definitely. So the bad part about pulling all those small mobs is, of course, the affixes, right? We do have Explosive and we do have Sanguine. And we saw when, I believe it was Method and A who did this pull at the start, they just had so many explosives spawning, and that the Sanguine pulls drop at the same time. So it did work out for them, but it's just a very difficult thing to do. And most other teams instead choose to just go straight to the Sand Queen, just they have limited space to deal with the boss, but they still choose to do that rather than pulling the trash in front.
So I like what I see here from Team Puolukka. They actually hold on to their Bloodlust for the first upheaval. Reason being that once you aggro the Queen, she actually goes down for her first upheaval within 20 seconds or so, and then you're just not really doing anything for 10-15 seconds. Lose a lot of DPS uptime. When she comes back up, she only goes down every 40 to 45 seconds, so they get the full effect of the Bloodlust. Well done by them waiting for that. Team Copenhagen has not yet used theirs, as they do kind of group up these sand traps in the corner. We do know those sand traps spawn near players, which is why you're seeing them all so closely bunched up.
Yeah, then there's of course the Sandstorm ability as well that happens for the Sand Queen here. Now Copenhagen did pop their Bloodlust now as well. They might have just waited a little bit for cooldowns or stuff like that to be ready. But on Team Puolukka's side, this, as I said, we saw the Sandstorm, which is a huge AoE in the whole group that actually displaces you at the same time as well. And the Sand Queen, of course, buffs herself with an Enrage kind of buff that increases her damage done, also from the Sandstorm and the upheaval. So you need to make sure that you dispel that, as a Rest Druid can soothe that away.
You do get them when the drones die as well, so you can soothe it. It is not an infinite buff, though. I mean, you can, it will wear off when she goes down for upheaval. Shouldn't be too much danger for the Cavalry of Prot Warriors with their mitigation right now, but we will see an upheaval here in a moment from either side. Now, rogues can actually cloak, and as we're actually seeing right now on Team Puolukka, they can cloak and kind of clear the area of sand traps as they are nature damage. The upheaval is also nature damage. Pretty big hit there on Gauthier, but nothing too dangerous.
Yeah, so one thing to mention as well, which Jack mentioned earlier, is that Night Elves can actually shadow melt the upheavals to not get hit by that ability at all, if I'm not mistaken. Now, we haven't seen any shadow melts so far from Team Puolukka's side, so I do believe they want to do a skip later on and just want to save that ability.
There is a horrible looking gnome there, though. So there is no Shadow Meld available for them. Sand Queen now down to 8% for Team Puolukka as they look to finish that on Copenhagen. Not far behind, 18%. They'll probably have to deal with the wrath of one more upheaval, which really is just kind of a time dump as you sit around doing nothing, waiting for the boss to reappear. Both teams had a very similar strategy at the beginning of this dungeon, and Team Puolukka's already kind of pulled a fair bit ahead.
Yeah, so Team Puolukka having a lot of single target damage here, did also pop their Bloodlust earlier, so it's going to be back up earlier as well. Now, of course, we do see them kill this small trash back here that is in front of this corridor here. Now, of course, there's a lot of rogues, so the rogues can actually open all those cages and open all those doors that you can't open otherwise unless you have the profession for it.
Yeah, exactly. I think if they have jewel crafting, they can.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's blacksmithing. Blacksmithing makes the keys.
I think both.
I think both. Okay. Either way, there's rogues, so who cares? Click does indeed pull the trash to the side, as we saw earlier. The Croc, along with that Thug, making sure to let the team pass by safely, jumping back into action with Heroic Leap, and then immediately using that Shadow Meld to get past the two mobs at the top of the stairs. They are sapped by both rogues. True CC able to just run past them safely without incurring any proximity aggro.
Yeah, so we see one of the rogues actually stay behind here while the rest of the group goes forward and just skips past this trash pack because he wants to open the cages and get all those buffs for the team.
Unfortunately, we do have a death for Harudra over on Team Copenhagen. They're doing the exact same skip. I believe the death is kind of forced, though. If he's still playing a dwarf, if I'm not mistaken. So if that's the case, certainly he couldn't Shadow Meld after providing the mobs, pulling the mobs to the side for the rest of the group. So we'll have to see exactly how that ends up. I would assume the res has not come up yet because it is a 100-yard radius for the res, so you can res them even from these couple of floors down. I'm sure they've tested this before. They've run up the floors, done the skip, done the stealth skip, and now Herdra will be resed up safely a couple of floors up by gravity.
Yeah, one thing to mention here on Copenhagen side, I don't believe any of the rogues actually stayed behind to open any of those cages downstairs, if I'm not completely mistaken, so they will be missing some of the buffs, which are important because it's a tyrannical setting, as I said, and the bosses just take such a long time, and there are difficult bosses too, as we saw Madeleine wipe 3 times on the next boss. So those buffs help you a lot, not only for more damage, but it also gives you more survivability.
So just to remind those at home, as we see these sanguine pools drop on the ground, we are in a sanguine environment, so when a mob dies, it will drop a pool on the ground, healing any friendlies, well, for them friendlies, that are in the pool, or damaging any players that are there, and they do stack, so if you kill 5 mobs together, it's going to be a crazy amount of damage or healing on whatever enters it. Also, we have Explosive, everyone's favorite. We see some Explosive spawn here for Team Puolukka occasionally. Very small amount of health, but will explode for 50% of the team's health. That is in line of sight of it, should you not kill it.
Yeah, explosive are also very dangerous if you're running a full melee comp, because those mobs walk away when they're low HP, right? If they walk away and they're still alive, that means they can spawn explosives, and the explosives tend to spawn close to the mobs. So if the mobs all run away when they're low HP, and then explosives can spawn all across the room around the area. Now for melees, it's going to be a lot more difficult to deal with them compared to range DPS, because they have to walk there.
Gravity goes down for Team Copenhagen. Really kind of ballsy pull here as they pull it out to the side. Unfortunately, they have dropped some Sanguine in this doorway. We've seen this hall be such a problem for the previous two teams. It's really one of the most dangerous with the Sanguine explosive affix. Noct goes down as well. Haruder's just fighting for his life right now, as a lot of those fire dot debuffs have hit him from the arsonists within this hallway. And I mean, the strikers are just sitting, the speakers, excuse me, and the striker are just sitting in that Sanguine pool, being healed to full. It's going to be a full team wipe for them. Sims, I believe, manages to get out by just kind of vanishing and keeping safe, saving that 5 seconds worth of penalty by dying. But we're going to have to wait for Gravity now to re-stealth, get all the way back upstairs, re-res Harudra and Noct, and they're going to have to go at it again.
Yeah, unfortunately, the rogues do not have an out-of-combat rest. This is one thing I think they're missing, because else they could have rested the healer back up and he could have mass rest. But yeah, the rogue surviving vanishing doesn't really help them at all, because the healer still died and he needs to get back to rest up the rest of the group here.
You know, I do agree with you. Rogues don't have enough, and they should be given a res. Let everyone know this fact. Gravity is finally back upstairs, starts resing for Team Copenhagen. Team Puolukka looking really solid. 0 deaths on the board as they very safely grind through this hallway, making sure they eliminate all potential threats as they finally engage Jess Hollis, the second boss of the dungeon, along with their first reaping pack at 21%.
Yeah, so one thing to note here, Hollis, once he reaches, I believe it's 75%, he will walk around this corridor and he will actually get hit by those pools that are in this corridor already from the previous trash. So you have to be very careful, because he will walk around and open those cages, right? If you stand still in one of those pools, open the cage there, then it will heal for quite a bit.
Yeah, they will indeed, and we saw that be kind of an issue for Method and A in the previous series, where they had one wipe with Jess kind of healing pretty much to full, actually, standing in a Sanguine on the side of the room. Most teams seem kind of to bring him in that little nook at the very beginning of the hallway, so we'll see if Team Puolukka will follow suit in that sense. Copenhagen finally back on their feet and moving as quickly as they can through the hallway, making sure to eliminate any explosive threats that may spawn from the trash.
Yeah, so Copenhagen, of course, a little bit behind to Team Puolukka because of this full team wipe that they had. But Team Puolukka actually almost reached the percentage that they need until they can go to the cannon. So they did pretty much almost all of the trash already. They only need to do the cannon part. Of course, they need to kill this boss first, though, because we have seen teams struggle with this one.
Yeah, just a combination of having some of the explosives spawn from the people in the cells that you're saying, in combination with Sanguine dropping, an interrupt being missed for one of the howls. I mean, a lot of problems in the previous series. Explosives of galore right now for Team Puolukka as they cleave them down, making sure that they handle those appropriately. Fear goes out from Jess, interrupted at the absolute last second. Flashing daggers now, the team will need to line of sight this, else they will suffer a very large physical hit.
Yeah, so this boss in this phase is actually pretty difficult because of Bobby. Now, Bobby does have a lot of casts that also need to be interrupted, especially one of the most important casts is that he will jump on a random player, he will kind of channel a slash, and he will stun them for the duration. Now, you can assign interrupts, which I believe most of those teams obviously do, so you will assign interrupts for the boss's howling fear cast, and you will also assign people for Bobby's cast. Now, if the person who is assigned to interrupt Bobby will actually get stunned by Bobby, then you of course need a backup. So it's kind of difficult to coordinate your interrupts for this boss, and there's a lot of things who can go wrong.
Team Puolukka is certainly quite stable here, adversely to Copenhagen right now that just did a massive pull down the hall. Saroni is just dipping sub 10% a couple of times there, but managing to hang on. A lot of trash here, but I've been noticing they've also been missing a lot of kicks on the speakers with their watery dome, which hopefully they would like to save some kicks for, because it provides that massive absorb bubble on the rest of the trash, and they don't exactly have an offensive dispel. We know they're running Alliance, so they don't have Arcane Torrent as a Blood Elf, which, you know, was a former popular meta choice in previous MDI. So a lot of time wasted for them here as they start to move through and get ready to pull Jess as well.
Yeah, we see Copenhagen are going to go a little bit overcount here for the trash percentage that they actually need, because we see on Team Puolukka's side they just did the trash skip through the cannon part, and you only need 22%. You can get the rest percentage on the cannons. Now, of course, we saw Frusha die here because he can't be a Night Elf, right? So, of course, they're missing those 5 seconds again, and they have to use the rest again to get him back up.
It's for the greater good. Shaman sacrificing themselves for the greater good of that pool. Team Puolukka now getting into position for the cannons in the corner. Now, cannons usually are everybody's favorite for the players. They kill reaping, they kill everything in their way. However, it's slightly more difficult here. They do have the favor of at least one range DPS, so the entire melee team won't be responsible for some of the explosives that spawn, but the cannons do not kill explosives. So you can't just outwardly ignore them. You will either have to line of sight them, or of course they do have the support of the ranged in the form of DJ Frusha, getting some shocks and bursts in on those as needed.
Yeah, we see the cannon shooting the right part, so triggering this pack on the right side, while we see the warrior, actually the proud warrior, go inside the room. He will pull some of those mobs that they skipped earlier back out, so you can kill them with the cannon. Now, this is the important part about Tol Dagor as a dungeon, is to just do as much trash as possible with those cannons, because they just do so much damage to the mobs, and it's just so efficient to kill them with it, because not only does the shot from the cannon do damage, but it also knocks them back. So essentially, those mobs don't actually need to be tanked, so you can avoid all the damage from them and just kill them with those cannons.
So we can see the cannon doing an absolute mass amount of damage for Baru. They're almost reaching the damage that a prot warrior can output when Thunderclap's spamming as the mobs kind of funnel through the door. The problem is they are spawning a lot of Sanguine in that doorway, so as the mobs come in, they start to park there, and there are some marksman kind of physical ranged mobs. They'll park in that Sanguine and just be unkillable, especially with how many stacks are there, but they do manage to move them out, and I'm liking this positioning a lot. They've marked the tank, they've marked Click, they know where he is, so that the shots have a fairly small radius to make sure that they don't accidentally clip the tank or the melee that are trying to help cleave the reaping pack down. So well done by Team Puolukka here, just reaching 49% for trash. Jess Hollis in the second phase here for Team Copenhagen.
Yeah, so it's very important that you don't move around randomly while the cannon is going on, because of course the player in the cannon wants to kill the trash mobs. Now, if you're a melee player and you go like, oh, let me just go in and interrupt this mob, and the player in the cannon shoots at the same time, then you are going to die. It's going to one-shot you. So you definitely have to be careful here. And as you said, the marks, especially in the tank, very important. And one more thing to note, as you said, explosive just so difficult to deal with, because of the explosives just don't get killed by the cannons. And we saw Frusha actually being very, very good to deal with them, because if you have a full melee lineup, they can't go close and kill them, because else they die to the cannon. But the Frusha actually has ranged and can kill the explosives to help out the cannon person.
Or the cannon needs to wait for the melee to go in, and then they lose a ton of damage from the cannon. So certainly not a good combination. We do see Baru finally get back in the cannon, dips out for a second just to get that Tricks of the Trade active on Click, who's hiding around the corner, making sure that the aggro from the mobs is not turned onto the cannon, immediately killing him quite quickly, quite frankly. Gotcha dipping just a bit down from some of the damage, but no problem for them, as Copenhagen is now at 12%, 11% on Jess Hollis, looking to clean up the rest of the fight. So the actual Jess Hollis encounter, pretty clean for both teams. I mean, no problem. The wipe we saw earlier from Copenhagen came from a trash issue.
Yeah. So the elemental gem, I just saw the earth elemental come out from Frusha here, which is also one thing that is really good, especially for this cannon part, right? Because if you taunt them with your earth elemental, then the tank doesn't have to go in, and the tank is not in danger of dying. So you can just stack them all up, pop the earth elemental, similar to the trees of a moonkin, and you can have the cannon person just shoot on top of them and not worry about killing the tank.
Moon, can you say?
We saw them once.
We did. Team Puolukka just waiting for the remaining 3 mobs to kind of funnel in towards the cannon. They're at 69% right now on the board. Once those die, I think it's about time for that. They switch to the far cannon, because they do need to kind of go around this balcony area to get to the 3rd boss at some point soon. Herder dipping a bit low here for Team Copenhagen as they run up, but does manage to get the Shadow Meld off as a Night Elf. Knocked, unfortunately, does not make it, and they will have to use the res on him in just a moment.
Now, one thing to note, of course, is both teams are still saving that Bloodlust. They used it at the very start of the dungeon, but now they're most likely saving it for the very last boss, because it is a very dangerous boss fight, especially in Tyrannical. So if you only get 2 Bloodlust anyway in this whole dungeon, then you might as well just save it for the most difficult boss, which is the last one.
With how dangerous Jess and Bobby are in this dungeon, and the fact that all the teams are seemingly saving their Bloodlust for the last boss, perhaps it wouldn't be the worst idea to actually use Bloodlust on the second boss as opposed to the first. The first really isn't too dangerous. You have an infinite amount of space, even if it's a small amount. You do just kind of circle around with cloaks, but either way, they do know best here. Whatever works best for the teams, as they are well practiced in this dungeon. They do reposition over to the next cannon for Team Puolukka, dealing with the 85% wave, but Click does go down here. Gautya does not have him at all. Gautya goes down as well, and this could be absolutely disastrous. Now, DJ Frusha, if he goes down, might have his Ankh available, in which he will actually be able to kind of save the team from certain doom, as they all do wipe here. Full 5-man wipe. The last explosive's about to go off. We'll see. He does have the self-res available, if I'm not mistaken, so we'll see in a moment.
There's one problem here, though, because the Reaping mobs did reset, and they are standing in this walkway. The Reaping aggro of the mobs is really, really high. So if Frusha... oh, and there's one trash mob here, too, which is very, very bad. So if he will Ankh here, he will pull this Luther mob, and he will probably pull some of the Reaping, too.
Yes, Ankh will not be, I don't think, an option here. I think they're probably just debating on what's going on. I mean, they got to do something.
Yeah.
But they're probably talking about it right now. The gravity of the situation increases for Team Copenhagen as the Resto Druid does go down right now. Harudra dipping a bit low as well as he runs around with 21 stacks from the Reaping Mob. Does manage to survive as Resuscitate is cast by the Windwalker Monk, getting gravity up. So they kind of avoided a close call there as well. Could have been a wipe should some more mobs have survived, as Harudra was barely hanging on with those stacks. But Team Puolukka has been silenced, it seems, at the moment.
Yeah, so I think they're just debating on what they're going to do now, because they have all these Reaping mobs that reset. And now, if you really... Okay, we saw Frusha Ankh here. I do believe he aggroed them up, but we don't see it right now. Now, on Copenhagen's side, once gravity is up, this is their chance to just kind of catch up to Team Puolukka, because they are far ahead, but this probably cost them a lot of time.
I believe what happened was they were waiting for that looter that we saw, the Volpera, to kind of despawn or move. I don't think it actually belonged there. I've never seen a Volpera there. So once it despawned, he popped his Ankh, got in the cannon right away, and decimated the remainder of the Reaping. So that's actually a really clever play from them. Managed to recover to the best of their ability for the full wipe. Gravity still down on Team Copenhagen. Not still, but once again down, rather, on Team Copenhagen, accruing 8 deaths on the board as a huge amount of trash billows through the open doorway from the previous room, and they try to get it down. Some explosives spawning on their end as well.
So I do believe there might be some problem with a disconnect or something going on in Copenhagen's side, because Gravity did receive a rest and just didn't take it. So they're trying to continue the dungeon without the hero right now, which of course is a big problem. If one damage dealer can't connect, then you can probably still finish the dungeon. But there we go. So Gravity is back now. He did manage to accept the rest, thankfully. So they can continue doing the dungeon. Now Team Puolukka is back on track too. They are on 85% trash, so they only need to kill a little bit more until they reach the next boss.
You know, fortunately for Copenhagen, if there's one spot in the dungeon that the healer needs to DC, it's probably the best spot here with the cannon, as they're able to CC and just kind of shoot some mobs down really quickly. Team Puolukka now just dealing with the last percentage of trash that they need. 85%. They're certainly not going to go to 100. I believe they need 92 or 93 after they kill the third boss in order to finish their 100.
Yeah, so they are on their way to the second to last boss, which we talked about earlier, is usually not the most difficult boss of this dungeon. It does take a long time because it is tyrannical, but as long as you control those barrels properly and you make sure the Cinder Flame doesn't explode the barrels around and covering the whole room, then you should be fine here.
We see Darth Captain Valeri here with her evil saber. She gets pulled across the room. Now, we talked about this boss in the previous series, but just to refresh everyone's memories at home, the key mechanics of this fight are really the explosive barrels that spawn around the room. Players can interact with them by picking them up and placing them in other parts of the room. The idea is here to place all of the barrels in one nice pile away from the boss across the room, so that the melee can have a lot of uptime. She will target Cinder Flame in the direction of one of the barrels, causing them to light on fire and explode with this massive explosive radius, as we see here.
Yeah, we do see, I think, a little bit of a different strat coming out from Team Puolukka compared to the teams that we've seen in Tol Dagor before, because they are tanking the boss to the corners of the room, which we have seen at the start of BFA on live servers too. Now, in the meantime, on live server, they switched their strategy to just tank her in the middle and just dragging the barrels out of whichever direction she casts the Cinder Flame on, because the corners of the room just, of course, just leave you less space, right? And if there's one barrel that is too close, then it can very easily just cover this corner. So we see the more riskier strat here coming out from Team Puolukka.
It is paying off so far as Knight Captain Valeri reaches 48%. Once again, the corner proves safe for them as the barrels are exploding around the room. Now, there is one more thing that actually causes the barrels to ignite, not just her frontal spindle frame, but rather the fire zone that you see go down on the ground. It will go down under current barrel locations, eventually will erupt and cause those barrels within that area to explode nonetheless. So they're actually kind of using that to their advantage because the cinder flame, if the barrels are spread, are not hitting everything. We can see here, even right now on the screen, the mismatch of the circles, meaning the barrels are separated a fair bit. They move out of their own fire zones there, and Copenhagen has now passed their final reaping wave at 91%, and they're getting ready to aggro Knight Captain soon.
Yeah, so they're actually not that far behind anymore. You also have to consider the deaths on both sides. So Copenhagen does have 8 deaths, but Team Puolukka also has 6 deaths. So it's only 10 seconds different in between those two. Of course, as I said, both those teams are saving their bloodlust, not using it for Valeri here because she's not very dangerous. And you can see even the Rasta Druid doing approximately 10k average DPS, single target DPS on this fight, just because there's not much tank damage going on and not much other damage in general as long as you deal with those spells.
Yeah, certainly. You just need a quick dispel, and actually, once again, there is a dot that goes out, and if the warrior is lucky enough to get it on them, they can just spell reflect it right back on the boss. It can't cast on different targets. The Warden here is successfully sapped. I guess that answers the mystery of whether or not you can grapple sap and not just have to shadow step sap, but the sap is up nonetheless as Click runs up and grabs the remaining two. No, he doesn't. They're actually doing a full skip here, so he's going to run over, pull the Wardens to the side. They do move particularly slow because they deal incredibly high melee damage. And once they get close enough, he will likely just use his Shadow Meld. There it is. The rest of the team has moved safely on the far side, and they're getting ready to aggro definitely the most dangerous boss.
Yeah, so this boss is so dangerous because of the explosive rounds, which is one ability that he does on ranged targets preferably. They, of course, use their Bloodlust here. But yeah, since they do have 2 ranged DPS with Frusha and the rest of Druid here, those 2 people will always get the explosive rounds with 1/3 random target. Now, the more range you have, the more difficult this is to heal, because if you have to focus heal 3 of the same people and you get a double of explosive rounds, so a double means that he's going to do it right after another, pretty much giving the healer less time to heal them up before the second round hits, is much more difficult than if they're spread around the whole group, meaning that they don't have to heal one person up, but they can just heal the other people up instead.
I'm not sure if maybe I dreamed it, but I think at some point they did actually hotfix it so you can't have double wave anymore, double stack.
So you can have, you can't have double debuff stacks, but they still will do the round. So if you already have a debuff on you while they do the round, you will not get a second stack, but you will still get the initial damage from the explosive round, which is the most dangerous part about it.
Of course. So we see more of a traditional positioning here with the tank. Believe me from experience, the camera view here from the tank is not fun. Observers, please don't do that. But we are seeing the Deadeye here on DJ Frusha, who already had the debuff, so somebody else will need to step in the way of that. We do see that evade come up from Barua to make sure that he can safely take the... Actually, no, it wasn't evade, sorry. He just took the Deadeye to the face there. Deadeye needs to be rotated every 3rd shot. Debuff does last long enough that 2 other people need to step in before yours is cleaned off. And Aguri did mention you can actually parry it as well. So if somebody does manage to parry it, they will not get the debuff applied to them.
Yeah, so we see the rogues just rotating in and out, just taking the shots for the range DPS here, as the range already takes so much damage from these explosive rounds. So of course you try to avoid the big shot on them as much as possible, especially Frusha and Gotcha, who are taking just so much damage from these explosive rounds. But we even see Gotcha even go in cat form and doing some damage to the boss here, which is very risky because, as I said, this is a difficult boss to heal. But he's min-maxing everything here, doing 7.2k DPS.
Yeah, I mean, every bit helps, certainly, as they're about to down Gorgos here. Copenhagen still moving along quite well. They decide to deal with some of the trash. They have killed the 3rd boss. They decided to deal with some of the trash before getting to Overseer Gorgos as well. They have their Bloodlust available. They are quite behind, though, at this point. They've had an extra death on the board. Last time I checked, it was 8. They are now up to 9. So looking good for Team Puolukka here. Now, it's not going to be over just yet. Gorgos does need to fall here, and then they will need to backtrack and deal with all the trash on the cannon. Shouldn't take too long, but if something can always go wrong.
Yeah, so Copenhagen did catch up quite a bit, to be honest, because they did have this crucial full group wipe, which cost them so much time to get back. And we saw, of course, Gravity just not being able to get back into the game for a while here. But they caught up quite a bit. They did pull the last boss here. Of course, Team Puolukka is down with the boss, but have to go back and kill this trash. Now, it is a tyrannical setting, though, and the boss takes quite a while, so they're pretty much, I would say they're 1 to 2 minutes behind at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge difference between them. So as long as they don't have any mess up with the cannons or the orbs here, Team Puolukka is going to look to have a quite dominant performance here with a 2-0 sweep, showing why they don't feel they belong in this loser's bracket, trying to climb back out and kind of win this whole thing. We will have to crown that winner today. Team Puolukka to 94% right now as the cannon starts decimating everything. Well, backpedaled here by Click to make sure that he can still hold aggro, deal a bit of damage, while the cannon decimates the mobs from behind. 98 for Team Puolukka. One more kill, and it's going to spell it 2-0 for Team Puolukka as they advance in the losers bracket.
Wipes on both sides in this.
Can immune the bleed off, even the rogues as well. So we'll have to see. I mean, Gingy's rogue is named Gingy Dwarf, so I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that that is a dwarf rogue.
Yeah, so something to remember, of course, about if they were to go dwarf for that bleed, that they can't all change race at the end of a dungeon. So only one member of the team can change their class's race or their class itself at the end of a dungeon. So every player is going to be night elf as much as possible in here.
Let's have a sneaky peeky. It looks like we certainly have Gingy Dwarf. I believe Freg might also be dwarf by the looks of it there.
Yep.
He is quite short in stature compared to his fellow night elf. So 2 dwarves off the bat, and we're seeing a big pull coming up here in a second, what I predict at least for Method EU for both teams.
These are some
here we go.
huge pulls. Looks like 3 packs for Method EU, and looks like a little bit smaller, only 2 packs here on the side of Abrakeydabra. Now, these 2 teams did both do this dungeon in time trials, where Abrakeydabra was just a little bit slower than Method EU, which had the first place time in this dungeon.
Actually, it looks like Method EU pulled the entire room, save 1 mob that they're saving for the very end so that they could proc Reaping likely on top of the Golden Serpent, because it does RP a bit, fly around the edges of the room. So pretty much a full room pull here for Method EU, as we see now kind of kite backwards, a lot of damage coming up from them. We are, of course, back in this bursting skittish, well, not back to skittish, we haven't skittish yet today, but we are back in bursting skittish, Sours.
Oh yeah, so these mobs have a lot of health, so bursting isn't going to be much of a threat, but skittish definitely is. So Prot Warriors probably have the least difficulty of any tank on skittish, because they're doing so much damage with their thunderclap, so they're able to kite away from those mobs. And if these mobs get ripped off the tank at any point by the DPS, with some of these large mobs will enrage, and they're just going to one-shot any DPS instantly if they ever swing on them.
A bit of a scary moment there for now as he did sub 10%. I mean, you do have enrage from the big guardians hitting him quite hard, along with any bursting stacks. Bursting, of course, once you kill a mob, it will give you a 4-second dot that can stack if you keep killing them. So could spell disaster for the tank, no problem this time though, as the Golden Serpent will be momentarily spawning for Method EU, getting ready to pull it right as soon as it lands on top of them. There it is right now. They've of course have already used their Bloodlust, won't be available to them. Abrakeydabra only now killing the trash, but they do have their Bloodlust available.
Yeah, so the Bloodlust on the Reaping is maybe interesting. So we haven't seen how either of these teams have handled this dungeon during time trials. They were not streaming their attempts, and I don't believe they've released any VODs or any recording of any of them. So we know that Method EU does have a fast time, but Abrakeydabra is right behind them on their heels.
Yeah, I mean, we do see the Bloodlust finally go up for Abrakeydabra as the Golden Serpent spawns for them, absolutely decimating this first Reaping wave in a similar fashion that Method, both teams actually just pulled both of the first Reaping right on top of that Serpent boss. Now, it is a full melee comp for both sides, so dealing with those golden pools and, of course, the ooey gooeys that spawn there is going to be pretty crucial for both teams. One slip-up, Sours, and we're going to get that absorb on the boss.
Yeah, luckily these goos were nerfed quite a lot a while back, so they have 75% less health than they had, I believe, at the start of the expansion. And if one of these goos ever, these gold guys ever hit the boss, it's a massive, massive absorb shield on the Golden Serpent, and there's no coming back from that. So you gotta kill these, you gotta paralyze them. Looks like they've got these mobs entangled, blinded, paralyzed. Method EU doing a really good job at handling those animated gold puddles.
Method EU certainly going for gold right now. Golden Serpent at 47% for them, just slowly kiting away as that gust comes in. Will do a moderate amount of physical damage if you get caught in it, but also punt you a fair ways off. Doing a really good job here, both teams as well, to keep those pools together. You want to localize those mobs as much as possible. It helps with CC if needed, whether it's a Typhoon or Ursul's Vortex in support coming out from the Resto Druid, a Ring of Peace, whatever have you, but it helps a lot because if you put them as too far opposite sides of the platform, they could actually start pouring around the other side of the central area.
Yeah, so we've got to be really careful with where you tank this boss and where you drop these gold puddles, because if these animated golds start coming at you from both sides of the room, it could very easily run out of space when the boss is stationary casting any of its abilities, which is going to be very hard to recover from. And when you kill these animated golds, this puddle that you see on the ground will do damage very fast as soon as it hits the ground, and it does a lot of damage to players. It'll chunk them, maybe even 2 ticks I think is going to be enough to kill them, especially on an 18 Tyrannical.
Yeah, a bit of a close call there for Method EU as they kind of just kill those 2 goos right beside the boss, giving now the space he needs to safely get the Serpent through. But they're starting to pour out the other side, exactly what we were talking about here. They're now being pincered on either end by those golds coming in. They're trying to just go all in here, I'm pretty sure. Kill the boss off before these goos reach. Do absolutely anything you can to keep them away. We see a stun come in there from Gingy Dwarf as he kind of just desperately tries to claw at the boss, making sure it gets killed. They should be able to clinch it off. Abrakeydabra has caught up a bit because of that poor Method EU positioning, and they're only separate by 5% now.
Right, you lose a lot of damage and uptime with these melee heavy comps when you have bad boss positioning. They were so far away from the door also when the boss died, whereas Abrakeydabra is much closer. They have to run just a little bit less to the Gauntlet. They're only a little bit behind. Now, something I don't think we've talked about yet in this Gauntlet is that this is another thing that's been standardized for the MDI, where all of these mini bosses are always going to be spawning in the same order, starting from the front left and then going in a U shape around the room towards the entrance.
That's right. Yeah, we mentioned that yesterday, but definitely important for everybody to know that at home today, so it keeps the playing field even. We have seen some teams kind of pull those first 2 constructs that are skipped at the beginning of the dungeon into this room, and here they come right now for Method EU. Now, this is a really dangerous pull, Sours, because of that frontal that we just saw right now. It's a very limited space environment. You will be displaced by several of these mini bosses in this Gauntlet, so if you kind of step into the wrong place on one of those frontals, you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, these guys luckily have a nice pre-vis to see where the frontal is going, but if you get hit by them, it's going to stun you for a significant amount of time and do a ton of damage to you. And these guys, it can be quite hard to tell, honestly, where they're facing. They look very tubular, and you see them inside of each other, and so it's really nice to be able to be looking at the floor to make sure you don't get stunned and killed by these guys.
Yeah, I have found it also equally difficult to see which direction to look at if my monitor is turned off, but oftentimes, as long as you're paying attention, you do see the direction they're cast in, though it is easy to lose focus, especially with this particular mini boss pack that spawned, as you will have that axe barrage going out. Some teams opt to try and line of sight it elsewhere just because it's a huge bleed on the group, and they're also responsible for punting, as we saw that Typhoon come in from Xaylia there once that storm goes off from the second mob.
Yeah, so Method EU just hit now the 40% mark, so the next wave of reaping is going to come in. And something that's really scary in the King's Rest dungeon is that so many of these mobs are the smash type mobs. And when you're in this room dealing with, now they've got a mind control, this next mob is going to either cast a mind control on a player as well as some of these shadow bolts that have come out, and the other guy is going to do a blade storm. And the blade storm does a lot of damage. So it is tyrannical, not fortified, so the blade storm isn't going to kill you instantly here. But if you take a couple of ticks of it, it's really dangerous. And so dealing with the slams, dealing with the blade storm, dealing with the mind control, it's very easy for a member to get picked off randomly here.
But not even that, it's just a huge DPS loss because the melee need to run away as soon as that storm comes in. But there's a bit of min-maxing once again, favor of Prot Warrior that can be done with the shadow bolts, getting that reflect in as appropriate on the Queen. King is now left as the Queen goes down for Method EU on the left side, certainly right on their heels as Abrakeydabra downing those 2 big lost souls. We have a death come here from Mears, unfortunately. First death of the match. Immediately get that battle res off. They will not have that available again for another 2 minutes.
That's right. So luckily with these rogues, if you check the extension tool with our tooltips powered by Wowhead, you can see that these rogues are opting to use acrobatic strikes to give them an additional 3 yards of attack range on them, which it gives them just enough attack range to stay outside of Bladestorm, as well as a lot of other mechanics that are very dangerous for melee, such as these slams on the ground and the hunting leap and everything else that can really have a chance to give melees a really really rough time.
Yeah, Acrobatics certainly increasing their effective DPS, allowing them to safely maneuver out of a lot of the void zones that we're seeing go down here, and we'll actually continue to see with some of the upcoming trash and bosses as well. Method EU now goes through the Gauntlet. They did suffer the death, though. They will have their one battle res available. Hopefully they won't need it, but some really nasty trash is coming up. As every other team we see in King's Rest, they do skip past this Purification construct. Sometimes, though, some teams backtrack and actually pull this back into the room to combine it with either the 2 constructs in this room or the Reaping at 60%.
Yeah, so this room's going to be really scary. This is the real pressure point of where Bursting has a very high chance of wiping a team. So these little embalming fluids here are going to be casting these green circles all over the room, and if at any point a member of the team gets hit, they're going to start dropping these void zones on the ground that are going to do a ton of damage, going to be extremely dangerous. And so once these mobs start dying and start bursting, people are going to be taking so much damage. So the rogues are going to be able to cloak that off and they'll be okay. Everybody else is going to have to run away. As you see, now jumps so far away. The range on bursting is really scary. And so when a team did this yesterday, they ran all the way out into the hallway. However, Method EU has a little bit better efficiency in their positioning of this, so they're able to go straight into these internment constructs.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mentioned. Really efficient movement by them rather than just waiting around randomly in the hall. They don't have that happen to them, as we're seeing actually Abrakeydabra do. So they're just kind of idling here for a bit, losing a fair bit of damage. Dr. J finally getting that Cloak of Shadows up on that bursting, making sure not to die, as both teams in a similar fashion have pulled the GUIs, cleaved them down, and made sure did not have any bursting casualties. However, Abrakeydabra is now backed up into the hall, and some of them have actually not died, so they're going to be able to heal through this bursting wave, but they've lost a lot of time needed kind of to split up the chunks of damage to make sure they can survive the bursting as the last of the embalming fluids kind of rush in. Now, the even bigger problem is they've completely bottlenecked the hallway. They cannot move back safely into their room across the poison on the ground. We see Ashine has died, Swagless is barely getting healed up as well, so a bit of a misstep here for Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, unfortunately they didn't quite have the damage. They moved out a little bit too soon, and they completely messed up the pool in a way that Method EU had absolutely no issue with. So now, while Method EU is able to go straight into the boss, Abrakeydabra still has to deal with both of these internment constructs. Now, something you have got to be careful with these mobs is, what may not be known is, whichever tomb you're standing closer to is where they're going to entomb you in. I think they pulled these mobs a little too close together, so what will happen is one of these mobs is going to put somebody in this tomb here. You see the door is open now, they just let their friend out, and then a little bit later the next one's going to cast. But you cannot interact again with this tomb for a little bit of time after. It looks like they got the timing right there, but if you time this poorly, the animation of the door closing will still be going when the next person gets sent in there, and then you could take some extra damage because you're not able to interact with it just
right,
yet.
you are, yeah. No, it's very important to stagger or kind of desynchronize those two mobs, and they're definitely at the bare limit of that. I'm sure they've practiced it a million times, so no coincidence there for them, but the two constructs are going down in a moment. But let's talk about Machimba for a second. We are on the second boss here for Method EU. Really clean run, except that one small death on Mir's hiccup earlier in the Gauntlet, so they're doing quite well. Have combined their third Reaping Wave on top of Machimba. Now, Machimba absolutely trucks tanks. If there's any kind of tank that can, just withstand the damage well, it is a Prot Warrior, and he does melee infrequently. We see a huge amount of damage coming out of right now, surpassing the rogues with the Reaping plus the boss affix here, and it is going to be solely Zalia's responsibility usually to break people out of that sarcophagus.
Yeah, those Shadow Smashes are really dangerous, especially with all the fire on the ground. It's another one of those mechanics where on Tyrannical, standing in it for just 2 seconds is going to be enough to kill you instantly. And the other thing Machimba is notorious for is draining my fluids. You really hate to see him when he does that. And so what that's actually going to end up doing is it's going to slowly lower your health, and then until you get healed back above a certain health, you're going to be doing less damage. So Method EU has now used their Bloodlust on this, so we know that they're not going to be doing a very large trash pool of Bloodlust after the boss.
No, certainly not. They're likely going to have it available again either for the third or fourth boss, depending, or maybe even Shadow of Zul. I really doubt it, though, in a Tyrannical setting. You don't see that kind of usage of it. 18% here for Method EU as they're rounding out 50% of their Bloodlust usage in just a moment. Should perfectly fall off as they deal with Machimba here as the room fills up with fire. Now, those fire pools or puddles, or, well, they're not really pools, puddles, but they do actually despawn later in the fight, so you can't actually fill up the entire room unless you're horribly inefficient with your positioning. So as long as you kite in a proper pattern, you're good. Really good movement here from Method EU. I love to see this. The boss dies right beside the exit of the room. As soon as it's dead, they're right up the stairs getting ready for what is probably the most, in my opinion, dangerous trash of the dungeon, especially if you don't have things like, you know, bops and dwarves available.
Yeah, of course. This trash is really dangerous because of these spectral berserkers. They put a really nasty bleed damage over time effect on the closest target to them in melee. Now, the rogues should be able to stand in there and use their dwarf racial to take that bleed off of them, or they should be able to parry it as well. So they do have a lot of ways to deal with it, but if it does end up, it does stack as well, right? So if a member of the team ends up taking 2 stacks, they're almost definitely going to be dead.
And just as you say that, now actually has 2 stacks on him. The trick here is he dips quite low though, but Zele manages to kind of get that heal on him, making sure he doesn't dip into death. Now, the trick here is that the bleed does last 10 seconds, and oftentimes berserkers reapply it at the 8-second mark. So you can either outrange them, in which case they will apply the bleed to their closest proximity target, the rogues, or just get them a 2+ second stun at the 8-second mark, making sure that the initial dots fall off, and then they can safely reapply them on the tank, unless you luck out with the parry.
So we're going to see, it looks like probably Abrakeydabra has not yet used their Bloodlust. So when a team got to this point in the dungeon yesterday with Bloodlust available, they ended up pulling this trash that Method EU is fighting right now alongside the trash that Method EU did in their first pool. So they're turning 2 pools into 1, but it looks like Abrakeydabra is not actually doing that. They're doing the exact same pool that Method EU did, but with the Bloodlust as opposed to without it. This is definitely not what you want to do when you're behind one pool in the dungeon.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they didn't pull the Beastmaster as well. The 2 Raptors really aren't very dangerous. They had a favorable patrol right now from the Hulk, who's just off completely in the distance. Using Bloodlust, I mean, they certainly decimate the pack quite quickly. I love Divine Field's positioning there, standing right in between the 2 Hex Priests that spawn, getting that Spell Reflect up so that their Spirit Bolts were queued at the exact same time and reflecting 2 spells for the price of 1. Bloodlust is still active for a few more seconds, so they get some benefit in the next pack, but quite a big put here from Method EU as they're dealing with their 4th Reaping Wave down the hall.
Yeah, so 4th Reaping Wave now for Method EU. They're dealing with it nicely with this one trash pack that was just outside of that door, and that's going to be, what they're going to do next is going to be shrouding all the way to the next boss to skip the rest of this hallway. So this one, or it depends, sometimes teams like to kill this one trash pack here, but all this trash can be skipped now. There's what is it? This is a dungeon with only like 120% count available in the dungeon, and you can do well to skip a lot of it. So looks like they're going to be, I don't know if this pool is intentional. They're pulling packs that generally you see skipped with Shroud. This could be bad for Method EU. We'll see if this was intentional or if they're going to have to recover from this one.
I'm going to go out on a limb and assume it's intentional. I mean, we saw now charge into the first pack.
That's good.
The rogues went and tricks the second pack to him, so they probably had all their kind of CDs ready for a big Clee Fest. We see a ton of damage coming out. Now is actually topping the damage meter. Just the pull is a bit rickety, and it is actually one, I don't want to say flaw, but weakness that Prot Warriors can have. If you're starting from 0 rage and you only get that first charge in, you've only built half a shield block's worth of rage, so you are a bit vulnerable until you get your first shield block up on a Prot Warrior, which is why we saw some of a dip quite low, especially with that Frost Shot coming out of the Witch Doctor, but they managed to decimate it no problem. I did see that they blinded the Berserker in the back to kind of alleviate some of that damage on now with the bleeds that come out.
So it looks like the way that they've opted to route this dungeon is they used blind on that Berserker, and then they're going to all be able to either vanish on the rogues to drop combat or shadow meld for everybody else to not have to deal with those 3 Berserkers. And those are definitely the most dangerous mobs in that entire hallway. So skipping those Berserkers like that is really well routed from them, and this is perhaps why they got that 25-minute and 8-second time during time trials in this dungeon.
I mean, this is really, really clever play from them. They had a blind for the pack that they pulled. They blinded the second Berserker, then double sapped and went right past it. They're at 98% on the board. We know Shadow of Azul is going to give them the remaining percent they need. They're just going to stealth right past the Berserkers on the way out of this room and then easily complete their 100%. Huge time and a danger save for them. I mean, triple Berserker, nasty, nasty stuff, even a double. Abrakeydabra, not down but not out, of course, still dealing with the rest of the hallway. They're only now getting to that 3-pack in the middle of the bridge, but let's talk about this boss here for a second, Sours.
Yeah, so Kula the Butcher is really scary, and so it has 2 main abilities. The first one being this this axe bleed that we talked about at the beginning of the dungeon that's going to put randomly on any member of the group. There's no way to really bait this mechanic. You just kind of got to hope for the best, and maybe it will hit you, maybe it won't. I don't see it on any of the members, so perhaps one of the dwarfs got it and they're able to get it off. And here comes Severing Axe. See, the bleed goes on to Miraz, so I don't think he's got any way to deal with it, and you can see just how much it's chunking him. Look, but Zelia's got full mana. It's not really an issue at all for him, so they've got to be careful with him. And the other mechanic, of course, is these whirling blades that go around the room, and it's good forward thought to be tanking that boss in the middle of the room when it's first, because after after you down it, it's going to continue to periodically spawn in the room and spawn whirling axes from the center of the room there. So baiting the initial whirling axes in the center of the room means that there's never going to be any sort of nasty overlap from whirling axes.
Right, you are. We actually see, as you were saying, that exact thing happen. Now, Zanazal, the second boss of the council, we do know that they're always in a set order for the purposes of the tournament. Zanazal, the caster shaman boss, essentially, will cast Lightning Bolt occasionally on the tank, which can be reflected or, of course, interrupted. But the more important thing is interrupting the Poison Nova, and when Call of Elements, which spawns 4 totems in a perpendicular fashion around the room, when those are up, it's important that you kill the explosive totem immediately, followed by the Earthwall totem, which constantly pulses and absorbs shield on the boss. The remaining 2 totems, especially in a heavy melee group with a Resto Druid, don't really matter too much. As you can see, they're kind of just leaving the Thundering Totem on the side for now.
The healer is in cat form this whole time, so he's not worried at all about getting kicked, and all the melee DPS don't have any spells that have any risk of getting hit by that Thundering thing that's going to be kicking you guys. So they're okay. They don't have anything to worry about. They do well to interrupt that Poison Nova. If somebody in the group calls it and maybe doesn't kick it or who knows what, if that spell goes off, you're almost certainly going to wipe, especially on an 18 Tyrannical. And we see just how quickly, look at how well they have coordinated their DPS split. So the healer and one of the rogues is enough to handle the explosive totem, while the rest of the group goes and kills the Earthen Wall totem, which puts a fairly hefty absorb shield onto the boss whenever it finishes its cast.
Now getting pummeled there a bit. Now I think Method EU's ultimate goal was really to kind of beat that second wave of Call of the Elements. They were just shy, about 2% off the boss for doing that, so they had to kind of incur a bit of time loss there. It would have been perfect otherwise for them. Finally, we are at Akali, the final boss of this council. We do have to watch out, though, for Zanazal now, as he will, just like the first boss, randomly appear on the platform and cast that Poison Nova, which could be detrimental for an all-melee group, so they have to keep their eyes peeled where it might spawn.
Oh yeah, so the Akali's got 2 really main abilities. The first one is this debilitating backhand on the tank, which will knock the tank back, and it will put a really nasty debuff on the tank that makes them take a significant amount of increased damage. And the other ability here is the barrel through, which is a charge on the target with the arrow above the head, which is then split with all the targets that soak it. Since this is a full melee team, it's very easy for them to all just stay in melee range and get full damage on it. And you see now is unsuccessful at parrying or blocking the debuff, so he's got to do a little bit of kiting. And we see Zalia is able to run really far for him and taunt off him, which is a really good thing to be doing as a healer if you have taunt available to you, or as another DPS in the group, to give the tank some breathing room.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have enough mobility. I think it's more so to keep the boss centralized so the rogues don't have to run all over the place DPSing. The reason I kind of snickered there is, you know, we said it might be dangerous for melee for Zanazal to kind of port randomly around the platform, but he ported right on top of them and cast Poison Nova, so really fortunate there for Method EU, as they, once again, as predicted, stealth past the triple berserkers and get ready for Shadow of Zul. Now, Shadow of Zul, definitely the most dangerous of pretty much any of the trash in here. Fortunately for them, it is not a fortified weak. Now, I just want to take a look, because right now, Abrakeydabra is at Zanazal, about to kill him. At this point, we had Zalia just barely healing. He was just DPSing to his max. He was about 9.1, 9.2k DPS at this exact point in the fight that Abrakeydabra is at. Elsarat only at 5.5, so they really went all in to maximize damage. You can even see here Zalia, on one of the most dangerous mobs for a tank, is already in cat form DPSing for Shadow of Zul. A lot of trust coming out of the group for him.
Yeah, so Shadow of Zul used to be able to be dragged around the room, but now he mostly just kind of hangs out in the center, and so he's going to be casting the Shadow Barrage on the tank, which does a ton of damage. So most tanks this expansion are fairly bad at dealing with big magic hits, and Prot Warrior, while it can spell reflect some of them, can't spell reflect all of them, so it's going to be taking a ton of damage from him. And you see this little kind of volcano-y zone over in the distance, so these things have a 15-yard range on the damage that they do, so as long as the group is able to stand far enough away from them, they're not going to be much of a threat to them. Otherwise, a member of the group is going to have to stand in it, and he's going to be taking a lot of damage from it.
So we see now go in and pop his Berserker Rage to make sure that he does not get feared by the mob's proximity, going in and helping just kind of just cleave it down. They don't have an offensive dispel in the form of an Arcane Torrent, Priest, Shaman, etc. So they had to just raw kill it through its shield and make sure it died. And right down the stairs they go. They've already done their 100% and are on King Dazar. Their 5th Reaping Wave has spawned, and the final boss of the dungeon is here. They have Bloodlust available, and Cyrus are likely going to be saving it for that 60% mark when the second Mounted Raptor comes out, and King Dazar is he is damageable, but it transfers all of the damage, of course, to his mount.
That's right. So what's kind of nice about that Shadow of Zul mob is that he doesn't actually spawn any sort of Reaping Ghost when you kill him, so it's very easy for the rogues to just vanish, as well as the rest of the group to use their Night Elf Shadow Meld to just avoid that 5th Reaping Wave and go straight into the boss. See, Method EU is, of course, holding their Bloodlust, because it's really good to use that Bloodlust to kill the mount when it comes out, because it has a really bad fear that if it comes at a bad time, it could potentially fear the tank so that his back is facing King Dazar when he does his slash, which is really bad as a tank.
Abrakeydabra just now crossing the bridge to get to Shadow of Zul. They skip past all the trash, have 3 and some change percent remaining for trash, but King Dazar just now hitting his 60%. We can see Tsala spawning here in that kind of golden river. Immediately the bloodlust does come up from the teams, and they'll be looking to destroy that raptor as quickly as possible. As mentioned, you want to avoid as many of these deathly roars as you can. Now can immune the first one with his Berserker Rage, but it will not be available for a second, but by then the mount should be dead.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, they're just absolutely
so with the power of Bloodlust and rogues, so Outlaw Rogues are pretty crazy on AoE, right? But they're also one of the best classes, if not the best, at 2-target cleave. And all damage done to the Tazala, as well as King Dazar, when he's on Dazala, is going to be redirected into the mount. So you can effectively double the DPS you're doing to the mount by doing a nice 2-target cleave onto them. So they kill that so fast with the Bloodlust that it's not even any threat at all that a second fear is going to be going off.
I mean, just look at the amount of damage support that Xaylia is doing too. There's so much trust and such clean play from the group on Method EU that Xaylia is able to just kind of refresh some dots, get right back into cat form, and do as much damage as possible. Blade combo, the most dangerous, well, the main tank ability on this fight, extremely dangerous. A lot of damage over the course of 4 consecutive, increasingly large hits. Is just a joke for a Prot Warrior to handle with block up as well. So now is generally safe, allowing Xaylia to get as much DPS up as possible. Now, King Dazar has entered the final phase where we see the trap spawning around the room in 2 separate configurations. One of them is this kind of clockwise pattern, starting and ending at the river that they're at, and then of course the kind of checkers flip-flop one where there's a safe zone and a not safe zone, and then it kind of changes the suit.
Yeah, luckily this pattern always spawns in the same spot of the room, and it always rotates the same way around the room, so it's very easy to just stand in a certain spot every single time on this fight and dodge it perfectly. Looks like a flawless run out of Method EU, almost an identical time to how they did it in the time trials, just a couple of seconds slower, perhaps even a little bit faster. No, it looks like they're just barely going to miss out on time trials, but yeah, the shield block on King Dazar is a little disgusting. Now his health wasn't even moving during the blade combo. The Prot Warriors are quite a tank this expansion.
I mean, it's not all about the damage that the Prot Warriors produce. I'm actually so excited for this dungeon. This is going to be huge. I mean, these are 2 of the most coveted teams here, so I'm expecting to see some just things beyond what we've seen from other teams. Both teams starting off with a stealth and expected to be a really large pool here. Now grab some of the patrol as well, making sure they hit that 20% mark so they can drag the first Reaping onto the boss.
Yeah, both teams look like they did the exact same pool here, the exact same way, so we'll see which team ends up doing more damage. You see now clapping away, and here comes the rogues right behind, and then the Death Knight skyrockets into the top. The power of Festermite and Bursting Sores is pretty phenomenal. Like the damage that Unholy Death Knight can do in situations like this is really just unmatched, as you can clearly see with these damage meters.
It's actually quite incredible to see how close together every mirror versus themselves was. I mean, the 2 Unholy DKs are reaching about the same amount of damage, same with the Rogue, same with the Prot Warrior. Now, Mirrors was a bit more lacking in damage versus Swagfist there, but we had some damage come out of Xaylia to compensate, so pretty even between both teams as Method EU is getting ready in just a moment to pull the boss. Moved just slightly slower. The Reaping is spawning. Abrakeydabra has already started on Sky Captain Craig. Now, we are back in a tyrannical setting. Do have that teaming affix, more trash and more trash percentage required per kill, along with the Quaking. So these are still a full melee comp, along with Resto Druids that are hungry to get in there and get some kitty DPS in. So you got to be careful with those Quaking Sours.
Yeah, so Quaking is kind of a problem, but it's not so much of a problem when you have 3 melee. They just got to do a little bit of spreading out, and as long as they kind of have it figured out, they shouldn't be losing too much uptime. So both DKs, if you check the inspect element, you can see they're opting to use slightly different Azurite setups, where Frag is using actually, I believe, the exact same Azurite setup that we saw Shakib from Method NA using in this dungeon yesterday, whereas Shine here is using a completely different setup where he's using a Treacherous Covenant Festermite setup, so he's doing a ton of damage when he's at full HP, but if at any point in time he rips through it like we saw happen earlier in Freehold, then he's going to die almost instantly.
I mean, we're just seeing here, Divine Field unfortunately does get clipped by that frontal on Abrakeydabra, but one of the main things, and I was watching it a lot in the last dungeon, is just how aggressive Xaylia is playing as a healer. Every single chance he gets, he's at a distance, he's pouring some wraths in. He's in melee, he's going cat form. Whereas you look at Elsarat on Abrakeydabra, he's playing incredibly safe and defensive. Nothing but regrowth spam coming out of him, safely moving to the side. You can even see it on the damage meters right now. And those kind of little tidbits really add up towards the end of a dungeon, especially when you have two teams of this caliber. But we do have a death going down from Fragment, so they're going to have to use their battle res early, as we still have 40% left on this tyrannical boss, which is quite a lot of health to chew through.
Yeah, so this boss is really, really scary, so the teams have to be really carefully watching out where this parrot goes. And so the way that the pooping in this boss works, if you're not familiar, is when the bird flies up into the air, it'll then drop these green puddles on the ground on the closest target to it. So the team is just kind of doing a good job trying to position themselves around the room to avoid getting pooped on. That's just why Xaylia is so far away, as opposed to being in melee, giving the boss a really big bite in cat form.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, when it comes down to it, we both have a death on either side, so we're going to kind of cancel each other out. I was about to say that the 5 seconds is really important for with teams that are so close together, but that's been canceled out. Both bosses at 10%, completely synchronized. 1 death on the board for each team. Divine dipping quite low there, spamming some Ignore Pain, making sure he gets that 50% absorb in as much as he can, as the boss actually does hit quite hard, along with a combination of a frontal, could be lethal. Nonetheless, at this point, anybody dying would be able to hang on. Mir's dipping to 11% damage. Both of the bosses go down in favor of Abrakeydabra first, just by a few seconds.
That's right. Both teams dipping really low there. You see both healers completely tapped on mana. Now, the Azurite Powder Shard that the boss does a lot of damage, and so there was a couple times where it was hitting more than one target, because perhaps there was a little bit of movement from all those void zones on the ground. So when it hits more than one target, the healer is going to fall behind, and then if they've got a dodge, then they're going to be losing uptime. And now the damage comes out at fairly set intervals there, so there's nothing too much to worry about, which is why you don't see any panic and the healer going earlier, which could happen if you freak out when you see that happening to your team.
So we see a similar pull here as they grab the Enforcer on the bridge, run right past it, and everybody shadow melds, vanishes, or already pre-stealths to get rid of that aggro. Method, are you doing I mean, both teams doing
it's
a
like
very
identical routes.
Yeah, pretty much identical routes so far. So both teams grabbing a fairly sizable pull here. Likely will be close to, if not proccing, that 40% reaping, at which point I assume that they're going to grab it into some more trash. Likely not into the second boss, the Council of Captains, just yet. But then again, we haven't seen them do Freehold just yet. Now dipping pretty low here. A lot of damage coming out of these mobs. Should be easy for them to handle. He can always bolster that with a bolstering, assuming he has that talent, Last Stand, which is pretty cookie cutter for the Prot Warriors. If you want to check that, Sours in just a second there. We'll let you know in just a moment.
For now,
yeah, just have a look there. Abrakeydabra, similarly large pull to 33% now on the board, and I got it. I will have a look, and you go ahead.
Yep, so these guys are both doing a really good job. Method EU did a little bit better with their cleaning up of the trash there. They're just a little bit ahead on time, killing mobs slightly faster. Dealing with some of these small yellow mobs here, I believe this should be enough count to proc the reaping, whereas Abrakeydabra is now kind of doing the first variety. They've pulled one of these monkeys, and this probably casts the most terrifying ability of this expansion, Slippery Suds. An ability, you see this debuff on each member of this team, this little bucket, and whenever you jump, you're going to stun yourself. And I don't know about you, Sloop, but I can't help myself from jumping, especially when I have this debuff on me.
It is the most dangerous and irritating debuff I've ever played with in my life. It's 30 seconds long, but you do have to remain composed and deal with that. A lot of trash coming in here for Method EU, as the 40% reaping wave is combined with quite a bit of trash here near the second boss's area. Abrakeydabra still has not procced their reaping. They just do so as I finish that sentence, and we'll be getting ready for an equivalent pull. Huge amounts of damage coming out of Fragments, well passing over 500,000 DPS.
Yeah, look, I think Abrakeydabra might be doing a slightly larger pull here. They've gotten quite a few mobs in there. Some of them are crowd controlled. You see the power of the Death Knight kind of spike up, and this is kind of one of the points in time where having a Prot Warrior, perhaps a little bit worse than having a Blood Death Knight. We see a couple of these casters on the side of Abrakeydabra left out, casting on them without any way to move them. Elsarat would have to typhoon those mobs in, or they'll have to line of sight or kick them to get them into their stack. But Abrakeydabra is now starting to fall like 1 one pull behind at a time with Method EU as they continue to blaze on. They've started the RP now. They've grabbed this pig. Once you start this RP, the healer kind of breaks off from the team when they're doing trash that doesn't require any healing. And you talk to this ring of booty over here, and then about a minute later, the pig's going to jump down. And then once the team joins up there later, they can all grab their hogs and finish that RP event.
And right you are, Sours. Abrakeydabra, of course, finishing up the rest of the trash here as they run over to the Ring of Booty. Method EU has now spawned their 60% Reaping Wave, along with a ton of trash. I mean, this is just an absolute slugfest of AoE damage dominance from both teams. Fragments, once again, skyrocketing in damage. We did see, actually, Jay output a fair bit more damage in the previous large pull compared to Gingy. Probably got the 5-roll god that he needed for that pull. But nonetheless, big pull coming up here for Method EU. Certainly they are slightly ahead, as the paths do look to be quite equivalent for both teams.
Yeah, so this is kind of the story of these two teams, where both teams have been putting on phenomenal performances throughout the entire tournament so far, but Method EU has just been that much cleaner and that much faster every time over Abrakeydabra, where the same thing was kind of happening in King's Rest, where, well, Method EU had a little bit of a different route in there. They were still just going faster, each thing at a time, as they continued to go through the dungeon. But now that these teams are using the same route, which is the first time we've really seen two teams in a dungeon be using almost identical strategies here. Method EU is just executing everything that much more cleanly, that much more quickly, and they're just pulling further ahead as a result of that.
No surprise to see the Unholy DK Ashine absolutely just decimating this group while they deal as much damage single target, which is really the kind of bottleneck here in the form of Ludwig von Tortolan, making sure to kill this mini-boss style mob as quickly as possible, and then we'll see exactly how they handle his version of the Lost Soul, which we do know spawns with 50% of the original mob's health here. Method EU at 71%, getting ready to pull Trothak, which we see spawn on the right side of the screen. Now, a very inefficient boss to have a full melee comp on, but it is a mirrored comp at least, so no particular advantage to either team for this boss.
Yeah, the Roast can stand quite far out, right? They do have that additional attack range, so they can do a little bit to deal with Trothak, but looks like Method EU isn't quite going into him yet. They're pulling a little more of these yellow mobs to cleave down during the fight, going to gain a little bit of damage on all of the members of their team. I believe the Windwalker benefits quite a lot when he can hit additional targets onto the boss, and Fragments is going to, of course, be doing a little bit of extra damage thanks to Bursting Swords, as well as we saw him use his Army of the Dead here on Trothak.
So I don't think we saw a Crusher being pulled from Method EU on their side earlier, but we do have the Crusher present here for Abrakeydabra, getting ready for Trothak to spawn in just a moment from the side here, as they have finished off Ludwig von Tortolan, want to make the most efficient use of their time possible. Perfect 79% here on the board for Method EU, certainly not wanting to spawn, at least not yet, the Reaping on top of Trothak. Perhaps they'll want to combine it when he's at a lower, safer percent, but we do see Trothak coming down in just a moment for Abrakeydabra as they finish up the last of their trash too. 77% on the board. I'm not sure if this is actually going to prompt their Reaping. It actually does, yeah, so they will get the 4th Reaping and pull it right on top of Trothak, so much more aggressive approach to this boss from Abrakeydabra.
You see the same cooldowns coming out from Ashine here with his Army popped. So, but now we're going to see the difference in the routes that these two teams have chosen for this boss, where Ashine is going to be able to do a ton of damage to the boss with his Bursting Swords, as well as to all the Reaping, so they're able to deal with it very handedly. And now a lot of this damage is kind of wasted on these smaller Reaping mobs, but it does mean that he's going to be doing a little bit of extra damage on the boss. And then they've got to deal with this Lost Soul the entire time, but the Outlaw Rogue is going to be doing quite a lot of 2-target cleave thanks to this mob that has so much health with the Reaping.
Yeah, really the Lost Soul is more of just a nuisance for the tank, and everybody just displaces you slightly, doesn't do any stacking debuff on you, since it's a tank-style, unCCable version of the souls that spawn for Reaping. So not a big deal for them as long as they just cleave it down effectively, making sure it's dead before Trothak, which easily it will be, as it's already half the health of the remaining that Trothak has. Trothak at 64% for Abrakeydabra. Method EU still chiseling away at 27%, has not procced their final wave of Reaping. Likely they're either waiting it to, if they're going to do it, they need to do it soon with Trothak, but it seems to me like they're going to probably pull it on top of the Council of Captains.
I think that definitely makes a lot of sense to me, that Method EU could be gaining a lot of damage on the Council of Captains with the Unholy Death Knight. That's not going to be available, of course, for Abrakeydabra, but the boss is very dangerous in and of itself without having the additional reaping wave there to deal with. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. Both teams still neck and neck in this race. Trothak on 13%, dying slowly. You know, with these melee heavy comps, you are losing a lot of uptime dealing with the Sharks. We see it's running after Zalia right now, so they do a nice lead to bait it out into range. But if it goes into melee, then that guy does nature damage, so it does magic damage to these guys. It's so dangerous, can kill you very quickly. So as long as they're doing a great job here, they haven't had any slip-ups. There's like so much that you've got to be worried out for, whether it be the Sharks, whether it be the quaking on the whole team. Any sort of misstep on this boss can very easily cost a member their life.
Certainly can. Want to bait those fish out as Method EU cleans up Trothak. Their second boss in the order. Of course, one of the nice fun things to see in this dungeon is really the open nature of the dungeon. I mean, these teams kind of have it down to a whim. They already know their pathing, but for us, any of the bosses could come forward from them. They kind of group up in front of the Council of Captains ready to pull it. So we're going to see here if they opt to use their reaping on them. It doesn't seem that they do. Bloodlust is available, so we'll have to see if they decide to use that. They're actually holding on to Bloodlust as we speak. They might pop it after the first grape shot jump from Eudora, but I think by now they would have used it if they were going to use it. So likely they want to combine some kind of massive pull after the boss would be my guess. Abrakeydabra not far behind. Trothak at 11%, about to fall. Already have dealt with their reaping wave, also holding on to their Bloodlust though.
Yeah, so Bloodlust, I guess, for whatever reason, Method is opted not to use it. Now, the grape shot in Captain Eudora is quite dangerous on this boss. If he targets the same member of the team in succession, it's very easy for the healer to fall behind on them and kill them. And so the other mechanic that this boss has is you see there's two different brown circles that can occur on this boss. There's the small brown circle, which is going to be giving a buff or a debuff, either critical strike chance, haste, or a damage taken over time effect. And so the bosses are affected by both. So if the boss gains the crit, it's very dangerous for the tank, as they're going to be doing a lot of tank damage. And likewise, if the bosses gain the haste buff, they're going to be swinging very fast on the tank and doing a ton of damage to them. But if you can get that debuff onto the bosses, they can die remarkably quickly with it.
It's a huge amount of damage, and the efficiency of this boss kill really comes down to handling those brews properly. And it's not even just damage on the tank. I mean, imagine Eudora getting the crit buff with one of the powder shots. It could easily just one-shot one of the players, so definitely don't want that happening. As we see mirrors get quite low here, Abrakeydabra unfortunately does have Jay die. They're going to need to use a Revitalize there on the side, and a poorly timed quaking interrupts the res from Elstrad on Dr. J, costing them another 10 seconds or so, waiting for that quaking to pulse just so Jay can be resed here. 2 deaths on the board, and I mean, against a team like Method EU, that is a hugely crucial error. It's going to cost them a lot by the end of the dungeon. Method EU has now downed Eudora and is at 30% on Raoul.
Yeah, so for those wondering what Jay was doing over there on his own, the RP event, the roleplay event you've got to do to activate this boss is there's a pug that'll spawn in the previous room that you've got to chase in a circle, and then you have to interact with a cage to free a mob so that you can engage the boss. Now, if you don't do that, you'll end up fighting all 3 bosses at once instead of 2 bosses, which will make them do 100% increased damage, which kills the entire group almost instantly. You have to do the event every single time when you want to fight this boss. And so that mistake there, they were already behind Abrakeydabra, and the death there cost them time. They were very slow on that event, and so that is causing them to fall further and further behind. Dr. J goes down.
And, I mean, it's just such a costly error. Like, they need to use the Battle Res on Jay right now, obviously. Battle Res not available for sub 5 minutes for them. Dr. J would not have died there if he had his cheat death available, which he unfortunately procced in that mistake made earlier spawning the pug. So the mistakes are just starting to kind of group up for them. Bit of clipping here from the quaking on Method EU. Nothing to be too worried about, as they do finish off the Council of Captains and are headed over to the final area here. Now, they're 84% already. They've had their reaping, their penultimate reaping, and they still have Bloodlust available, and they're pulling Harlan Sweet. I'm expecting to see some kind of Bloodlust plus trash combo here.
Oh yeah, so Method EU grabbed the last bit of trash they needed for the reaping, and then I thought they Shadow Meld skipped it, but apparently not. Some of it is joining them here in the boss fight. So they have Bloodlust available. They're doing a massive trash pull with the boss. This is a lot of kill count. I don't believe this is quite enough kill count to actually get them to the 100% mark, but during the first phase of Harlan Sweet, he's not really that dangerous. He's only going to be casting, you see this arrow on their monk on one target, so they have a lot of room now to maneuver around the platform and deal with these fire of Wisdoms on the ground. And once they get him now to the 70% mark, he's going to start casting that on all of the melee as well as the healer in the group. And so having that additional space with dealing with that trash back is going to give them a lot more freedom in how they handle this boss.
Yeah, a lot of damage you need to chew through for Harlan before he reaches his DPS thresholds. Now, once he gets to 30%, he will get that 100% increased damage taken, but also increases attack speed. Once again, protware doesn't matter, or really won't be too dangerous for that protware. Now, if I'm not mistaken, actually, second phase starts at 60%, question mark. So we'll see it in just a moment.
Sounds right.
Within 4%, as we only saw one member get the cannonball there. So just a moment here, Harlan Sweet will hit phase 2 for Method EU, 93% on the board. They'll be looking to clean up that remaining percent, likely with the Ravagers and painful motivation that we've seen so many other teams do already in this dungeon. Abrakeydabra at 5% on Captain Rule have already had their 4th Reaping Wave, but at this point, I mean, there's no way these guys aren't looking on a second monitor. They know Method EU's ahead, so they're probably going to be forced to do a pull that is not entirely comfortable for them, but they have to do it. I'm expecting to see a lot of trash join the fight here on Harlan Sweet, along with that Bloodlust.
That's right. This looks like it's going to be another clean 2-0 for Method EU all the way through the winner's bracket. They haven't dropped a single match, where Abrakeydabra did drop a match earlier against Method NA earlier in the tournament, and it looks like they're going to drop 2 in a row here to Method EU. So it's time for them to start thinking about how they're going to handle the lower bracket. Now, they don't know yet which team they're going to be facing down there, but barring some critical mistake for Method EU, this is going to be a quick 2-0 for these guys.
Yeah, I mean, Harlan Sweet just now down to 40%, getting close to that third phase at 30. We see the multi-cannonball strike come out. The group moves very well together. Zayla is still hanging out by himself, wants to do his own thing, not burden the group, not get burdened by the group, but also getting ready to root any of those grenadiers that come down to make sure they don't reach the pack and explode for a substantial amount of damage. Harlan Sweet now has been pulled for Abrakeydabra. We still haven't seen the use of that Bloodlust, 88% on the board, but I mean, Method, they're just hitting the phase now. Sours, 93% trash on the board. I don't think there's any way
to yeah, they were brave enough. They know that they're in the lead. They didn't care. They pulled more trash with the boss now that he's very low and just dying so fast. Now, one of these mobs is casting Painful Motivation. It's going to be killing all the trash fairly easily. Now, does add a level of complication to the pool, but it's nothing that Method EU cannot handle. Only 1 death on the board. A remarkable performance out of these guys. Once these mobs die, it will be the 100% Reaping, and then the boss should fall shortly after.
Yeah, I mean, by the time the Reaping kind of does its RP, Harlan Sweet is dead. 100% at the exact same moment, and Method EU sweep once again 2-0. I mean, there's just no stopping these guys right now.